Good evening, everybody. My name is Michael Rosen. I'm the Tolland Town Manager. So good evening to the councilors and to the Board of Education members here, as well as several members of the public. Looks like we have a good showing tonight. I'm going to try to do my best to keep an eye on the waiting room, but if any of the other co-hosts could let people in, I'd appreciate it also. I'm, as the town manager, I get the privilege and honor to start this meeting tonight to have the joint meeting of the council and the Board of Education, which is an annual meeting we do. We have this joint meeting for the purpose of discussing the appropriation request of the Board of Education. There's going to be a short presentation by the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Willett, who will be sharing his screen momentarily. There's going to be two opportunities to have questions between the Board of Ed and or the counselors to have questions to the Board of Ed or to the superintendent or to the proper party that can answer said questions. There's also an opportunity for the public with a 2-minute limit to ask any questions that they may have about the overall budget. And just so we're all working off of the same materials, this is the budget in question is the February 10th edition of the Board of Education budget, which has a $1,275,999 increase, or 3.19% percentage increase over last year, 2020 to 2021. This is talking about the year 2021 to 2022. So the idea of this meeting again is that it's sort of an opportunity for the two boards to come together and discuss the budget. The superintendent and I, and it's been a pleasure to work with Walt and his staff throughout the budget process. This is my second time through the budget process in Tolland now, so starting to get the hang of it. And it's about a 9-month long process. So obviously we actually start, just to kind of give a little background to this, we start the budget process in October. So we only get about 2 to 3 months off on the budget from July, August, September, and then we're back in October. And we start with the capital. We meet with all the departments, the department heads, the school district, and talk about their capital needs for the next 5 years. That ends up going to public hearing, which we had on February 11th, which was also the same day that the Board of Education submitted their overall budget to me, the town manager. And we're at sort of the halfway point now, maybe a little bit just shy of the halfway point between now and the end of the budget process, which ends with referendum on May 4th. Between now and May 4th, there's several other opportunities for budget-related discussions to take place. I will submit after tonight's meeting, and encompassing any feedback we may have after tonight's meeting, I will put together what I believe to be a responsible and recommended overall budget, town budget for fiscal year 21-22, and submit that to the town council on March 3rd. There's a couple of nights in mid-March, the 10th, the 11th, and the 16th, that there's discussions with the various departments about their operating budgets. And that ends up in a public hearing, March 17th. All of these, by the way, will be done using the Zoom platform that we're utilizing right now. As we're still tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're not having in-person meetings at this point at public meetings at Town Hall. And after the public hearing on the operating budget and the overall budget, we then, council will finalize the budget, and then we'll have an annual budget presentation meeting. So last year we did that using the Zoom platform. At this point, we'll have to see where we are in April, but traditionally we do it in the library program room, but we'll have to see where we're at in another month or so before we make a decision on whether we're going to do virtual or in person. And then we will have hopefully annual budget referendum in May 4th. At this point, I can just share with the folks here that we're anticipating having a referendum this year. There's some requests right now being done through the governor's office, through CCM and the Council of Small Towns cost about what that could look like to have a referendum safely. And I'm actually participating on a call tomorrow about that. So I may have more information to share in the near future about whether or not we're going to be having a referendum this year. It's a question I've asked several times on municipal calls. And again, we're operating under the assumption that we are going to have a referendum. So just to kind of put that out there, which also means that we have to get ready for referendum. So anyway, without further ado, let me turn this over to Dr. Willett, who is going to start off with a little presentation about the Board of Education's budget for next year. So Dr. Willett, thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate you filling us in.
No problem. Happy to be here, and obviously it's great to have an opportunity to to be all together. So just to give it a kind of a brief introduction, taking a look at, does everybody see the slide presentation here?
Yes, thank you.
Showing that? Okay, great. So so just to start us off, Mike had already said kind of what the purpose of the meeting is, and I also want to reiterate and express thanks for the town and the town employees. We have a great relationship, and we're a great working team, and I deeply appreciate all the efforts of the town staff. We're always having to bounce back and forth amongst each other to get things done, and we're just one great team, and I appreciate everything that they do. So tonight, we're a joint TC-BOE meeting under the PA 1360, Public Act 1360, and also under the town charter. And typically talking about non-educational expenses and recommendations to the Board of Education on such. And then, as I think Mr. Rosen had illustrated, the Board of Ed would respond in writing with anything that they didn't accept if there was a suggestion made officially through this process. So just a couple of things to cover real quick to give a context. The Board of Education goals for the year are ensuring the completion and implementation of the Portrait of a Graduate, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. And then fostering a culture and climate that supports high levels of learning and engagement, promoting mental and physical well-being, and leading to individual student success. Assessing district needs and advocating for resources to meet them, and pursuing non-educational sources of revenue, and ensuring a quality education for all students, and nurturing and supporting an inclusive community where every person, regardless of their identity, is acknowledged and respected. And this will ensure that Tolland students have the necessary resources to thrive in school, in the community, and in the diverse world. So, as you know, under 10.222, it is the Board of Ed's obligation and responsibility to come up with a budget that does adequately serve the needs of all students in the community and in the town for educational purposes. And so their goals are right along in line with those obligations and responsibilities. The Portrait of a Graduate, many districts do this. And it's really, in short, it's envisioning what we would want a graduate when they walk across that stage to have in terms of skills and abilities, the kinds of things that we envision are important for every graduate entering the world to have from our school system. So, without going into every single word here, you can see that these are the kinds of things that you would expect for somebody to be able to function in the world and be a responsible member of society and an effective member of our national and world community. So, making sure that we develop cultural and global understandings and partnerships, and providing authentic instructional connections, and providing a safe environment. All of these things are things that you'd expect. And so this is part of the budget document as well, and it goes into all of the things that we came up with as working groups for the Portrait of a Graduate. And finally, district goals, as you might imagine, they revolve around rigorous curriculum, making sure we're promoting higher order thinking, making sure we're focused on academic growth in the core subjects and in all areas, and reinforcing a common set of values and expectations, responsive education, and making the world a better place by engagement, mastery learning, which is very important for tomorrow, tomorrow's student, the core things that need to get done are covered really in the district's goals, and making sure that the kids are ready to participate in a global economy and in the world. So we all know how difficult the last year has been. We're coming up now on March and the beginning of the major impacts in this country of the pandemic. School systems across the United States, including our own school system, have seen impacts from the pandemic, as you might imagine. There's been significant academic as well as social, emotional, and mental health impacts. So just a little bit of an overview on this, not to belabor it, and I can provide more information for anybody interested in the next a few days, weeks, months, and beyond. It's no secret, and if you look at any periodical, at any research right now, American Psychological Association or otherwise, the American Educational Research Association, any of these groups will have plenty of research that show how the pandemic has impacted these school systems in the United States. So just as a kind of brief overview, the pandemic has generally yielded a 63 to 58% learning gain in reading relative to a typical year, and a 37 to 50% in math relative to a typical year. So in a typical year over the summer, for instance, we have what's called summer slide. We expect that kids will have a little bit of learning loss as they go through the summer, which is why, frankly, there's actually arguments out there, sometime in the distant future for not having a summer, break and having maybe an additional trimester type of thing, or breaking it into trimesters. And that's a whole different conversation for a different time. But the point is that there's usually learning that gets lost over the period of the summer, and that is typical. They're noticing that well beyond what is the typical learning degradation over that period of summer, there was significantly more because of the pandemic. And currently, as we're getting more and more data in, we are seeing that trend does continue, not only nationwide, but in Tolland. And there are things that we need to address that we're seeing on the radar. And so this budget and the positions in the budget that we have, and the budget itself, in almost every conceivable way, really is meant to address the impacts of the pandemic, which is why the ask out of the gate is what it is compared to even previous years. There are just many things that need to be handled that the pandemic has presented. So this is just brief data showing that it's not just us in Tolland, it's just about everywhere, but we have to make adjustments. We have to address the needs, and the needs are becoming very, very, very blatantly obvious to us. Also, mental health needs before the pandemic. There was significant amounts of data that our youth were struggling in general terms with mental health before the pandemic even hit, with 20% living with a mental condition, 11% with a mood disorder. When you think about like a 20%, for instance, if you take a rough, say, 2,000 of if a population is 2,000, 10% of that obviously is 200. So you're looking at 20% with a mental health condition in most places, 11% with mood disorders, 10% with some kind of conduct disorder, and 8% having anxiety. And I'll tell you right now, we know that this anxiety number, the number of students who are anxious and are suffering from genuine anxiety, not just feeling a little bit scared. Anxiety can be very very impactful, as it can prevent a person from doing higher order thinking when they're really experiencing serious anxiety. And that is part of the pandemic right now. Anxiousness is tremendously, not just in terms of just feeling a little uneasy. I mean, mental health wise, anxiety disorders, panic disorders, these things are going up significantly in our student populations in the country, also in our school system. So to the left is what we were doing a bit before the pandemic. To the right is during the pandemic, some literature, and I'll post this tonight on the budget site for anyone to be able to click on the links. But these links are also available within the Board of Ed budget document. I think you can click on them from that document, and they'll bring you to the relevant article or research. There's no question that it has got a significant impact on schooling, on our students, on their ability to learn right now, and their needs are more than they've ever been before. So, these are things that the school system has had to take into account when it looks to next year about how we really need to try to bring things back into some level of stabilization within these children's lives, within these families. So again, the budget that was put together this year was designed to address those challenges as we enter next year and try to kind of put the pieces back together from a time that has been one of the most difficult times in the United States history. So just keeping in mind where we're at. So in that vein, the budget has really got three major foci: recovery, remediation, and reform. The Board of Ed budget for fiscal year 22 seeks to recover things that, were program reductions, and logically so. There was a target to hit, and last year there was a target to hit. And so there were some adjustments made that, this year, those programs that, were funded through sort of a method of, pre-funding, so to speak. Now, fiscal year 22, those need to be brought back. And so looking at and making sure that we're going to have the resources and programs needed for students, this budget recovers some. Remediation, the impact of the pandemic is blatantly clear on student learning, achievement, social emotional learning. This is particularly true for students that were in vulnerable populations already. If they were struggling, this only exacerbated their struggles. If families were struggling, it only exacerbated some of the family struggles. All kinds of things are up. DCF referrals are up. The district's challenged in ways we've never been challenged before. So this word remediation goes well beyond what we would typically be using it for in the context of, remediating a child with an IEP and things like that. This goes into a new level of response where we really are trying to remediate not only what existed normally in the educational context, but all of the new challenges that have come to a head because of the pandemic. So that remediation takes the form of a larger group of students needing interventions, needing supports. And those interventions are both social, emotional, mental health interventions, but also clearly academic interventions. And not all of these students are students of special education, so to speak. Typically, people sometimes not in the field think of an intervention or academic intervention as a student of special education. Interventions under what's called SRBI, RTI. It's also through the state of Connecticut, it's required that boards of education address learning challenges and needs of students in the general education population, so that they don't end up becoming referred for special education, that it's an obligation, under the state's regulations and expectations that a school district will address the intervention needs of students who don't have IEPs in the general ed population. Scientifically research-based interventions and response to intervention is the terminology used. So there are many, many more kids in this population right now and in the coming year. And, again, this budget takes that into account and works to ameliorate or provide the appropriate remediation so that we're able to get students where they need to be. And finally, for the last 5 years and beyond this, public schools, Tolland public schools have been undergoing significant reform efforts, implementing programs that better serve students and their families locally while providing cost avoidance opportunities for the district. And so these programs in the last 5 years have been very successful in doing that. In my time here, we had a lot more outplacements when I first came in, and when I was a principal, there was a lot more. We've had some awesome leadership by many in the school district, including Patty Hess, Wendy Cody, and others who have really helped form programs that provide excellent educational opportunities for kids while bringing those numbers down and changing the nature of how that was approached. In addition, looking forward and into the future, the pathways that are being developed in the Tolland Public Schools will allow kids to graduate with an area of focus or pathway, such as engineering or business, wearing sashes, say, at graduation, having completed a program of study that honors and works towards or is a part of that pathway. And in doing so, some of these charter schools and magnet schools that that are out there that give themselves certain titles and names, whether it's aerospace or engineering or art and music or whatever, many times school districts like Tolland can provide programs that are equally good, or I would argue even superior to some of them, but because they can advertise in movie theaters, things like that, kids, and attrition would occur where kids might think that that is a better option, and sometimes resources go with them if they choose those options. One of the objectives of the reform was to make sure that that the Tolland Public Schools appropriately showed through their pathways and through their even their advocacy that even though we can't put ads in movie theaters like some of these places can, that the programs exist here, and then a child doesn't have to go to X, Y, and Z charter in order to get a focus on engineering or a focus on arts and music and that type of thing. They can get it here. And so the last 5 years have been working on significant reform efforts to implement programs that are great educational programs, that are providing cost avoidance opportunities for us, and that are reducing attrition to some of these magnets and charters and that type of thing. It's getting Tolland in the game. And so so it's been very successful. So the recovery, the remediation, and the reform are really the three major foci of getting this budget and getting this this coming year, to be a manageable situation for the district. And that budget is a major part of that, obviously. So again, a couple of quick examples here as I wrap up. These are just general descriptions of a little more detail, but focusing on remediation, what that means is we really have identified a significant increase in speech and language needs. That's not something that was easily done through Zoom or distance learning or remote learning. We still have hundreds of children that are remote learning. Even as we go more and more in school, there's still many families that choose the option the state of Connecticut has provided. And so there are many, many more challenges in terms of speech and language right now than we've experienced ever. So that is something that needs attention, and that is what we are putting attention to in this budget. Similarly, English language learners, that has quadrupled. It's something that none of us really expected, but it has been a major impact on the school district. And so we need to make sure we're dedicating resources to that. That is something that the state of Connecticut has very clear expectations about, and we need to make sure we're covering it. ABA services within our school district, supporting students that are working through autism, and support for learners that are on that journey. And that's an absolutely crucial aspect of the district's programming that is now extending to the high school. And so that is a major part of making sure that what's provided, what's needed is provided for. And social emotional mental health are also significant factors. And that right now through the ESSER funds, we would have the school counselor and the social worker as part of the budget. So most of those are, out of the operating budget or part of the standard budget. And then other positions are being supported through ESSER, as they were typically supported with grant and would otherwise be transitioning to the school district's operating budget. The ESSER grants will help us offset that for another year or so. And then reform, again, I talked about cost avoidance, attrition, and the pathways that are part of keeping the district on track and making Tolland and keeping Tolland competitive. So to kind of wrap up, Tolland does get a very, very good deal. It's a excellent community. Like I said in the beginning, and I'm hearing what Mike Rosen had said, you've got really hardworking staff here, working every single day with the only objective in mind being to provide the best service level and the best opportunities for the people of Tolland that we can. Very strong system, very strong community. Tolland school system is 133rd at 166 in per pupil expenditure, which is great value. The last 5 years and 3 years of budgets have been modest in the town for the Board of Ed, and class sizes are a respectable level. Over the last decade, expectations of state and federal government have increased exponentially, and this district has made the appropriate adjustment for enrollment over that span of time with respect to its teaching force. So that responsible action has been taken in that way too. And the new data sets confirm that Tolland is no longer in a long-term trajectory of loss of enrollment. Now we have the numbers to demonstrate that Tolland's actually going to, is reaching a level of stabilization. And then into the future, we'll start to increase in enrollment again. And so we have data to demonstrate that. And, at some point, not tonight per se, but whoever wants to kind of sit down with me and see it, I can put that data together, and I'll be posting that kind of information on the website as well as we go through the next few weeks and months. And the Tolland Public Schools performing very, very well, way, way above averages on SATs, on the accountability matrix in the state. Tolland's, blows away those measures, does a very good job, and we have many, many graduates going to many universities that you would recognize, and fulfilling their life dreams. And if they're not headed to university and they're looking for another track in life, Tolland is preparing those children too. So, Tolland's getting a great value. People are working very hard, and it's a great place to be, a great place to live, a great place to raise children, a great place to retire. And finally, we do have a lot of collaborations with the town with respect to Board of Ed and town, cooperation. The eChip Collaborative, which is the health insurance program that we have, we're all on the board together, board of directors for that. All of your, your leadership, Mike, myself, Suzanne Waterhouse, and others for the town, Mike Wilkinson, we're all as part of that board together, and we work collaboratively and cooperatively to make sure that Tolland's getting the best deal possible, and it is. It's been an excellent program and excellent synergy. The Utility Internal Service Fund, which you're somewhat familiar with from some prior conversations, is another big collaboration. The Board of Ed transfers its entire energy budget over at the beginning of the year, and it is part of a multi-year plan that the board and the town work very closely together to implement. And I think there's some history there, so both elected bodies have some idea of what we're talking about here, but that's not the way it is in every town, and that's another great example of how these entities are collaborating and finding efficiencies. And the town and the Board of Ed Field and Grounds Agreement is yet another example of how we work in collaboration really to provide the best value for Tolland. The thing about Tolland is there is a tremendous amount of that work happening together as it is. We really do consider ourselves part of the same team. The workforce is really one workforce, and we're working every day to make sure that that the best value is attained for Tolland. And I think all of us, every employee of Tolland can tell you that we're seeing that. We don't see, people twiddling their thumbs in any corner. Everybody is fully utilized to the highest level of capacity and time. And that's true of town services and town staff and board staff. So, everybody's working very hard to provide an excellent value and efficiency for Tolland, not only through these kinds of creative endeavors that were set forth years ago, but also ongoing efforts like those field and grounds agreements, working partnership together to make sure that value is sustained. So I think we were about 10, 15 minutes in. I think that's it. So just to wrap up, it is a great pleasure to be here tonight to kind of see you and have the opportunity to throw those out there. And at this point, I'll hand the podium, so to speak, back off to you, Mike, however you want to move us to the next stage of this process in this meeting.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Willett. That was an excellent summary and overview of the Board of Education's mission and what you're trying to accomplish with your budget. So we're at the point on the agenda now where it's item 3, which is recommendations and suggestions to the Board of Education regarding consolidation of non-education services and cost savings. So this relates to the item that Walt had shared a moment ago about Public Act 13-60. So I guess maybe the best thing to do now would be to open the floor to the town councilors. If you could raise your blue hand if you have questions of the Board of Ed or of the superintendent with recommendations and suggestions to the school district regarding consolidation of services or cost savings. And we want to make sure that, and perhaps if we need to get into sort of what non-education specifically means, but, I think we've done this a few times now. So I guess maybe why don't we just see if there's any questions and we can go from there.
So I think in the past, we've kind of just, any questions that we had, we've kind of brought up and dealt with. There are two separate spots on here, for the recommendations and suggestions regarding consolidation. And then there's petitions and questions to the Board of Education from the town council members specific to the BOE budget. So I'm not sure if you kind of want to handle them together and then do questions from the public after that. And then we can, generating from those questions, have any final petitions or questions to the Board of Education afterwards, unless you want to, exactly like you said, Mike, if you want to be specific about what exactly people can and can't ask on number 3, then do questions, then go to regular general questions.
Sure. I guess maybe if Dr. Willett, if you can kind of help me with this, but we sort of talked about this offline about what non-education services are. So this would be if counselors had questions, not so much about how many books are teachers ordering or things like that. That would be education services. Non-education services might be like overview type items like the insurance or perhaps capital or regionalization like we talked about last year. Is it possible to regionalize the finance offices of the two entities? I think I looked at the minutes of last year's meeting and we talked a bunch about that. So Walt, did I kind of cover that? I'm not sure if there's any other examples.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the nature of the public act is such that there is a moment in time in which the board finishes its adoption process, and of course, as we all know, under 10.222, it's the board obligation to find and present what is needed for education, not in excess and not too little, but what is needed, and then the town council obviously makes the allocation decisions about what can and cannot be allocated. And in a meeting like this, the non-education expenses, I think, are typically things like supplies and grounds and, those kinds of categories and facilities and back office consolidation would be such a question. That's a administrative expense. Can these kinds of things be combined? I mean, I think those are the natural kinds of non-educational expense questions that that public act is designed to sort of keep this process in line with PA 1360. And I think that's also because it helps, keep those foci where they're supposed to be statutorily, where the board's focused on education and the town on the financial aspects of it. So, of those operations specifically, not having the role or the responsibility of determining, for instance, whether the math program is running the way it should. That's more board side than town council side, but town council obviously is deciding the purse strings where it should be.
Right.
So that's roughly the lead into that, and those would be the areas I think we'd be kind of focusing on tonight for conversation.
Okay, so I see the first hand up is Sophia.
Yes, I just have a preliminary question. What is the difference between the questions asked in number 3 and number 5?
That's what I was just kind of trying to get at. So
Okay.
in the past, we basically just had like questions and asked all of the questions. I don't recall us ever breaking out between this section and that section, and we can surely try to do that. But I think in number 5, it's going to be any other general questions. It seems kind of repetitive to me. I understand what you're saying. It's what's the difference?
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, just this agenda, this is at least the second year where this split has been enumerated on the agenda into 2 business items. So, if it's something that the council and Board of Ed don't want to do going forward, maybe next year we can make a note of that, just consolidate it into 1 item. But this is how we've done it. So we copied it.
So I'm thinking how we should kind of handle that is any of the questions that have to do with, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, like USIF, technology, insurance, transportation, lighthouse, classroom sizes, the chief personnel officer, admin ads, all of that stuff is this first section. Second section is just every general, anything outside of those types of things. That's where I'm kind of heading with my list of questions. Does that seem logical?
Well, it does, but I don't think PA 1360 is any general questions of any kind for any reason. I think PA 1360 is meant to be a reminder that there's a break of, like in the federal government, you have the separation of powers. There is supposed to be a statutory division of what this kind of conversation has in it, so it's really the foci of such a meeting is really towards the non-educational expenses. This other add-on piece, I understand that it's in there, but again, going back to the nature of the Public Act, I think there has to be some thought as to what and why that is there, and that separation is part of that.
Okay,
So just
so
keeping that in mind.
my concern here is, we're going to have questions. And last year we asked all of our questions, and if we don't get the opportunity to ask all of our questions here with the Board of Ed here now, when do we ask you guys those questions? This is the start of the budget process. So, whatever questions everybody has in regards to the budget, we need to get them asked and answered before it gets to us to deliberate on.
Well, it's kind of broad because it depends on what questions that you're speaking of with respect to that. If they're non-educational expenses, that's what the role of the town council is, and that's what this particular situation, this PA 1360 is about. The rest of it is all part of the budget process. We've had months of Board of Ed budget process, and then we do have, beyond this point, many other opportunities for that. Plus, I'll sit down and talk to any individuals who want to about any aspect of the budget. But it's just trying to avoid the aspect creating more division and polarization, because something like this is designed for a certain purpose, not for sort of a kind of situation where it's putting people on the spot to answer everything. It's not really designed to do that. It's not really the function of the meeting to do that kind of thing.
Perhaps, if I can just say, maybe it's worthwhile asking the non-education. Let's go start with that and see where we're at. I did just click back on the agendas from the past, and we've been doing it this way since 2018. But I think it's fair. while we're all gathered and while the public is watching, perhaps if there's questions, we can start to knock some of them off and kind of see where the questions are heading here. Because we also want to get to public comment, and perhaps some of the public here has these same questions. So
right. Lou?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, focusing specifically on the Public Act. This is for Dr. Willett, if I can. Is there anything that your office or that the Board of Education has discussed as far as these consolidation opportunities? This is the second year that we've discussed this issue. This is the second year where we've said that we need to examine which ways in which we could consolidate as far as a cost savings. And is there anything that is recommended? Is there anything that's been identified that could fall under this Public Act that could be conducive for, consolidation, regionalization, something along those lines, where we could see a cost savings without necessarily a reduction or loss of personnel for this specific job?
And it's a great question, and I think part of the process, part of the the things that have been considered in the past have been things like back office consolidation. I guess the benefit of the heritage that you have here in Tolland is that you have a decade or more of people really looking hard at these questions. And the end result of that, Mr. Luba, was things like involvement in the healthcare collaborative, the creation of the Utility Internal Service Fund, the synergy of the building and grounds and fields agreement. Like we're all sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak, with respect to what's been done here. A lot of ground has been covered in these areas. So a lot of efficiencies are part of the picture in Tolland right now. The back office, the kind of back office conversation, consolidation, that has come up in the past. And of course, it makes sense that that kind of thing would be asked for from, asked to be explored again. And so that is something that I think is out there and has been in terms of a question. It has been in the past when it was reviewed for 2 different times when it was presented and looked into. There was a feeling at the end of that process that that there really wasn't going to be an added value from a back office consolidation. And the reason at the time for that, and I'm not saying that, it shouldn't be looked at again, but the reason at the time was that you have people working very closely together on the town and board side. It's not at all a toxic relationship. It's not like a situation where a reorganization is necessary to put everything in order. The board side and the town side staff work very closely together almost on a daily basis to try to provide the best kinds of efficiencies for Tolland. And you see that. And then the conversations that came out of that were, can we, if we reorganize, can we consolidate, maybe do it with fewer staff? Can reorganize structures? And the answers that came out of it at the time were everybody's really fully utilized. There really isn't a situation where you could reduce staff and then not greatly strain the staff that are remaining. For instance, Lisa Hancock doesn't need additional things to do or more things to take on, and neither do anybody on the board side. So consolidation or cutting away of staff would pile those responsibilities on someone else. And I think everybody felt like, and I think when they reviewed it, there was a feeling that everybody has all of the weight that they can handle without, trying to reorganize and put more on certain individuals. And that, looking at it from the perspective of what would it take to do that, we have a system on the board side called Infinite Visions. On the town side has Munis. And, while a consolidation, so to speak, could put everybody under one thing, Munis is not well designed for boards of education kind of functioning. And boards of education functioning, IV works better for that. And if it were crunched into Munis, it might not, it doesn't look like it would work really well, nor would Munis, would IV work really well for the town. So there would be a lot of logistical things that would have to be done to try to make those 2 things or that kind of thing fall under one. And the human hours lost in doing that would outweigh the benefit of trying to do that. Because it's not like it works in a dysfunctional manner now. It works in a very, very functional manner now. So it was something that was looked at, but the hard part about it really, but I guess it's a good problem to have, is that things are running with a high level of efficiency, and it has been looked at before. I know that COST has offered a grant, so to speak, to do this, but the thing to remember is that, COST and CCM, highly valuable organizations, very smart people, they're advocacy organizations. Tolland pays a membership fee for the advocacy of these groups. So you're paying like a $5,000 or $10,000 membership for a $10,000 grant, and really, that is what COST is doing for you anyway. So you're getting a grant, so to speak, but the truth is that organization, that is the kind of thing that it looks into. And it makes sense for toxic kind of structures for that to be the case. But you don't have a toxic structure here. So it always makes sense to continue to look at it, but that's one of the reasons why that particular area twice when it was looked at was sort of backed away from.
Lou, I want to just point out too that we are still going to go for the grant that was supposed to happen last year, but because of COVID, it didn't. And that is going to look at consolidation of back office stuff from, is it COST, Mike?
It's so it's actually the Regional Performance Incentive Program. It's run out of Office of Policy and Management, but we were applying through CROG, which is the same. We are a member of CROG, as the superintendent points out. So we were going to apply through them to OPM, but I'm on their website right now. The Secretary of OPM did not award any regional performance grants funds in that account. So last year due to COVID.
So maybe this year.
Yeah. So, but again, I mean, I understand, about the whole back office regarding the consolidation of staff, but what about some of the other positions, such as, the school, there's inside the budget, there's positions for school counselors, additional school counselors, things like that. Is that something that could also be more of a regionalized type of aspect where we don't necessarily have to have a fully dedicated one, but regionalize it shared between several other schools, where you could have, something along those lines, just as a, we're still providing services, but it's not a full-time staff member that we have on our books full-time.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely makes sense to ask that from a perspective that, hey, you have a counselor, like a person who is there to help people that are struggling socially, emotionally. Can you just share that with another district? That makes sense to ask that question. I guess, as one of the questions the council is asking of a consolidation and resource, I'll provide an answer in writing to that, because I think whatever I say now probably won't do justice to it. But I guess what I would try to say is, imagine, a counselor right now, say in the middle school, is responsible for, let's just use that as an example, 200 kids. And so if 10% have problems in a day, that's 20. And for middle school and for the kinds of issues they're doing right now, 10% is more than a reasonable number. Those 20 people, those 20 human beings are coming at you with all kinds of issues and problems that need to be resolved. And I would say that, in terms of counseling, for instance, that's about as much as a human being could handle without that job being split in another location or another thing. And I guess that's the issue, is that, there isn't really a lot of space here where these people are undertaxed. Right now, if anything, those 20 coming at them with the 7-hour day that they have, that's not easy to handle in a variety of ways. And that is the ratio. It's really like 1 to say a couple hundred there. So it's a tough situation, and I understand the question.
Yep.
I think that we do have to kind of talk to how social work works in our town. We do have overlaps already. So when we have a social worker in the school system, the work that social worker does with that child's family has a lot of benefit for the town of Tolland. And even the town of Tolland Human Services and the schools work very closely together on things like the Juvenile Review Board, these kinds of activities. We have to maintain privacy, but we work very closely together in partnership so that kids that are referred, for instance, for expulsion, I will call over to Nancy Dunn. We do talk about how to, use both town and school resources in a synergy to sort of get kids served in a way that otherwise they couldn't. And when that's happening, that's serving the families. And when you serve the families, that's less of a burden on the town community itself to provide other human services. So there is a lot of that happening right now. It's not like anything happens in isolation, really. These things help the community members in that they are connected to those families. They are getting that support. They're getting the support of those positions. They're really like a human service connection more broadly in that manner as well. So there is that benefit to the community with those individuals, even if we can't say split it with another community kind of thing.
And I'm sorry, I know in the 2 questions we've covered almost half an hour right now, so I'm going to move on, and I'll get my other questions to you in writing, because I'd like to see some numbers and I've got a few other questions for you regarding this issue. So thank you, Dr. Willett. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We can discuss those when we get to 5 also. So, Claude?
I was just going to say, in regards to sharing services, I guess this is kind of aimed at some of Lou's questions. We had the Shared Services Committee, and there was a white paper done in Tolland before our time, I think, that we can also read to look at what was already looked at. I was also on the Shared Service Committee at EastCon with Dr. Willett, where when he went through what Tolland actually shares with the town, other districts were impressed. So there has been a lot of work done there. I do think that it would be a great idea to look at software in the future. I know, Dr. Willett, you mentioned Munis, but I think there's been improvements in that software because I see a lot of other districts using it. So I think that's something not pertaining to this particular budget, but definitely something that this particular council or this particular Board of Ed could take a look at in the future. But really, when it comes to the back office stuff, like the e-chip and all of that, I feel like there's been a lot of ground covered there. That's all I had.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions that are non-educational before I get to mine? Okay, so for the Board of Ed, I guess the budget that you guys specifically submitted here, is there any way to tell how much of the increase is directly attributable to the COVID pandemic? Anything that's in here that is strictly COVID related increases?
I mean, I think Mr. Maury is up there with a blue hand. I can't tell what that means. He wants to respond to that question, or certainly I can.
Is it blue on your side, Dr. Willett? Like, do you have a blue hand?
It's blue on my, I don't know, on my screen.
You might be an older version. I got this weird new version now, and everybody's got all different color hands in that.
Oh,
so.
wow. Okay. Well, I have not had the benefit of seeing the multicolored hands.
There's quite a few, and I'll be honest with you, it took me a good week just to figure out how to raise my hand again. I just kept sitting here. I don't know how to do it. I'm sorry. It's not in here.
That's why I don't update things right away.
Yeah, don't update. Don't update. Jacob.
Does that library background come with the new one too?
Isn't it
You have a very
glorious?
extensive library, Ms.
It's a beautiful library background. I wish it was real. I only wish I was fortunate enough to have a library like that in my life. Besides, of course, the Tolland Library, which they won't let me sit in there and do these things. So, you know. Jacob?
Yeah, I'm going to try to at least start to answer that question, because I think it could kind of vary depending on what your definition of COVID expenses are. The first budget meeting that we had when we first got the proposed budget, I think the breakdown was 0.2% of that increase was additional cleaning needs, which I think would probably be the strictest definition of COVID-related expenses. Another 0.4% was recovery from last year's budget. And then I don't have the percentage breakdowns for you, but I'm sure Dr. Will can get you them just as far as what the positions were that were specifically COVID related. The ones that we talked about that fell most strictly under that definition would have been the speech pathologist position, because it's difficult to do that remotely, and it's there's been a lot of trouble with that with the remote learning year with speech difficulties. And then also I believe the two other FTEs, the autism program or ABA educator, and then the behavior interventionist specialist were also more strictly COVID related. I don't know if I missed anything there, Dr. Willett, but that was the bulk of what we had, I think, for strictly COVID related expenses.
Yeah, it's a very hard question to answer, and it's a really good one. But the things that are directly COVID related that we could leverage using things like the ESSER2 were positions that cannot be supplanted. And so my interpretation of that, and also after some questioning with the state, because I didn't want to base any kind of action in just my interpretation, I wanted something solid from them on it. Because the positions were grant funded prior, we're not supplanting them by using ESSER for them. So for instance, the social worker and the counselor this year are out of grant funds through ESSER or ESSER2 more specifically. So, to just say, of the things that I guess we could say are pandemic related, obviously social emotional needs, things like that, knowing we cannot supplant, taking positions like the school counselor that were funded by a grant prior and having them continue to be funded by a grant provides both the services necessary for mental health to sustain the kids that are struggling so much right now, while not having to quote unquote supplant something, which would not be acceptable. So this is acceptable because they were grant prior, and they are something we can leverage against the needs of the pandemic. So the social worker and the school counselor are really funded through ESSER and not through the operating budget of the Board of Ed. The ABA, the ELL, and the SLP, we are going to pay for those anyway. And what I mean by that is they're absolutely necessitated by what we have to provide in terms of special services for children. And if we don't adequately provide those, people have the right to ask for them through an alternative means. That alternative means is, it can be outside of our district if we can't provide it within. So those positions, speech and language, English language learner, we're required to match the needs of those populations and those those exceptionalities that come up. Now the ABA program, that's been grown for many, many years from the youngest grades all the way up through the levels. And now we have a population of students who are heading to the high school. So once again, that is the logical extension of what I talked about before in terms of providing excellent education service and a strong cost avoidance. If you have that program and it is a great program, which it is, staffed by great people, which it is, then you don't have to provide that program somewhere else. And there are plenty of other places that will be just happy to provide a program. But we provide such a great one here, and that's the extension of it, that then that's not really necessary. And so, the ABA, the ELL, the SLP, I would say in a normal year, they would be part of the picture anyway. It only exacerbated by the pandemic that those are even more broadly needed now, because the numbers, say, of speech and language needs are even higher than they have ever been at this point. And that's due to the pandemic. So it's hard to say what's limited to, what it would have been versus what is strictly pandemic, because almost every one of those positions will be more taxed because of it.
They're exasperated because of the pandemic. So
right.
So where I'm kind of going with this is, besides the ESSER funds, if there's additional funding that comes down, whether it be through the federal package or the state packages, if there's anything that we can shift over to a different source of funding, even for just a year or two, that alleviates pressure for a year or two, and then reevaluation after that time period. So that was the main impetus behind my question there.
Yeah, and so a counselor and the social worker do that through ESSER too. And to the point you've made many times, we can't count on what's not actually there yet. So, you've made that point about a couple of things in our history here that, until it's codified. For instance, ESSER 2, we can count on that because that's codified. Something that is out there that is somebody's great plan, there's a lot of things the legislature is doing right now on a federal level. I don't know that we can say they're going to take them all. And so, I think we can only count on what we have in our hand to make this budget,
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. Lou, your hand's up again?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, only if you're finished with the questions.
That's all right. Don't apologize. This is what the meeting's for. Ask the questions.
Okay. So again, this is for Dr. Dr. Willett. That now I know that you were talking about the cost effectiveness and about the programs that we need to provide. Under the IDEA, under the EASA, acts, all the federal provisions that we're requiring for fair and appropriate public education. But again, it comes down to the cost effectiveness. I know that we like to have things in-house, and you've already talked about that, but is that the most cost effective way to provide the appropriate counseling and appropriate measures that these students that may have a need to meet them? I mean, that it's great to have it in-house, but if it's something that's more cost effective that can be provided outside through outsourcing, I know that we still have to pay the cost, but if it's something where we're having to pay for a consultant as opposed to full wages and benefits for a full-time staff member, is that something that, has there been a cost benefit analysis done for that?
Yeah, great question. And I think that's been the rationale of the past. I'll tell you, when I started back in 2006, 2007, I think there was a narrative here. And so I'll answer the question in two ways. One, please indulge this for a moment. And then two, I'll get directly to the question you're asking about, like hard financial. But the first was that I really did sense that, way back more than a decade ago, there was this perception of what was a Tolland student and what was not a Tolland student. And that if the student didn't fit the frame of what a quote unquote Tolland student was, It was just that that student needs to go somewhere else. And so there was this sort of methodology and unstated way of just saying this child does not belong here. So there was a philosophy of that at a certain point in time, whether people want to fully admit that or not. I'll stand on that and go back and forth with whoever wants to, with plenty of examples of that. But that was kind of the philosophy many, many, many years ago. And at a certain point in time, there was a shift. Not only was there a shift in Tolland towards the cost avoidance of making great programs here, there is across the entire state. You'll see if you really look that many districts are trying to come up with programs of their own to more adequately serve the student populations in their district, because the special education costs outside of the district are absolutely insanely astronomical, and no one has done anything to control them yet. And because of the state of that affair in Connecticut, which needs to be resolved, but I guess, you know, somewhere in the future, that'll be the kind of thing that hopefully people will eventually get to. But it's fleecing. It's truly fleecing the different districts in the state through what's charged out there, say, for services. So it's an act of self-preservation. It's an act of professional and ethical and moral correctness to say, we're going to have the programs in Tolland that serve the students and their needs. And so from a professional, ethical, moral standpoint, it's crucial that we do that. But from a cost avoidance standpoint, you know, we can't have a 3-year average below 1% and, you know, really a 5-year average below 1% without having found strong cost avoidance measures that really change the way we operate based on the way we used to operate in the past, when a standard budget that's a maintenance budget is about a 2.5 to a 3% and a 5-year average of less than 1%. So, I mean, it's right there. And it's also right there in that the average cost of outplacement is about $69,000, you know, and one teacher is about $42.55. So, you know, it's really, it's something that has been important not only for Tolland, but districts across the state to be making this adaptation. And we've been responsibly doing so, which, you know, again, the proof has been in the pudding. Certain programs had 35 outplacements years ago, or down to about 13 now. And it's truly in the cost you're not paying right now. If we still had 35 outplacements in this particular program I'm thinking of, the cost would be far higher to the district than what it is now. But I can't take what would have been in the future. I don't have a time machine that we could get into to say, when these things didn't happen, here's what this budget would have been today. And so that makes it hard to sort of to answer that perfectly. But I can tell you that, you know, that 35 down to 13 means there's a lot of costs avoided there, especially when you consider that the average is 69, and that's not including transportation.
So Dr. Willett, that brings up can I interrupt, Lou? Are you good? Okay, so that brings up a good point there. So the increase in spend that we're seeing for ABA, the Tolland Transition Academy, and LEAP, can you quantify, or have we seen a corresponding decrease in special education costs that offset the significant increase in the spend for these programs? And if so, do we have a net of the new programs or the ROI on it? I just mean from an actual fiscal dollar perspective. And then you mentioned the average cost of outplacement, but not the per child cost of these programs here. And if I remember correctly, last year, just the staffing alone for LEAP was over $1 million in the last budget. And I know we're adding more now. You may not be able to answer this tonight, and that's totally fine if you can't. If you want to write it down and get it over to us before the next budget deliberation meeting, that's fine. But basically, you know, where are we now for these cumulative initiatives? And
So
what's the like per child cost kind of thing?
Yeah, and these are, you know, I understand it. We've been down this road before, and I've provided this information in the past. And I also think that we're starting to venture down the road of an educational expense. So for instance, are you going to not move the Board of Ed's budget forward because you perceive that we're not getting an adequate savings out of the ABA program? Are you prepared as a town council to do that? So, I mean, here's the thing.
We're not. I'm just asking, you know, the numbers. We've heard about these programs for several years.
That would be strictly an educational. That is something that the Board of Ed and Board of Ed elected members spend like the entire time of their existence as members, working with me on. So when it gets to a certain point of the decision making for the council, I don't think it's the council's position to be determining whether a particular program is doing what it needs to do or not, because it's serving those children with those needs. So for instance, I guess to answer the question, which I have answered in the past before, if you have 35 children that are outplaced and you consider that $69,000 is the average outplacement, and there's 13 kids now that are in that situation, you can't, it's a very difficult thing because you're avoiding that cost. The special ed funding being close to what it was in the past actually is an amazing thing if you consider that we have way more kids that we are serving in those populations. If we had the same exact one or even close to it, that means you're not paying for the outplacements for these additional kids that could have been outplaced. We're doing it with those kids in district versus paying what we would have paid for a larger number to have been outplaced. So it's kind of a very difficult thing because there's no way to answer that perfectly. And I guess the implicit thing about that is the town council saying that it's going to do an evaluation of the special education programs of the district. I think as a state representative, if you take a look at where special ed and the frustrations are around the state with that, is that there's so much fleecing going on in terms of special ed costs against districts that it's a ridiculous losing value game for districts to end up outplacing children. And I think you'll find that as a general theme in the legislature as something that's brought up as a constant frustration. So to say that we want an evaluation of exactly how much is saved, I mean, I think it's, the fact that we're not outplacing these kids, that's the cost avoidance factor. You're just not seeing a much, 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 much larger budget, and you otherwise would see a much, much, much larger budget if that was the case.
Well, I think that's the point of it, without trying to belabor this. Again, the overall task of the town council is to approve the overall budget. In order to overall approve it, you have to overall understand it. So in this case, with the education costs, the special ed costs that are there, it just comes down to understanding the numbers that are in the budget that have been there for the last few years, the programs that you're putting in place to remediate or mitigate those costs, to understand that fully, so we can go through and say, yes, we think this is a reasonable ask. There's a lot of ads in this budget that are all somewhat sort of related to special ed cost or special things. There's no teacher ads in here, except I don't know what the ESL is considered a teacher ad. So,
well, SLPs are teacher ads more or less, and the ELs we can consider it in a general class of that. But again, the Board of Ed's statutory obligation is to come up with what the kids need, and
Yep.
so there's a caucusing part. If people want to become elected for the Board of Ed, they get to understand the complete intricacies of the Board of Ed. When the Board of Ed hands a budget across, the assumption is through caucusing and the groups that can talk to each other, that these kinds of things have been vetted. I mean, in a 2-hour or 1-hour meeting or a 30-page document, that's really not, that's the process under PA 1360 is meant to keep those kinds of things, understanding that conversations about special education and services towards the children that need them is really in the domain of the Board of Ed. And if they don't think I'm doing a good job with that, they oust the superintendent or keep the superintendent based on whether they think those kinds of things are being done efficiently or well. So it's yeah, I mean, I understand. It's just that really, again, PA 1360 is not about deciding whether the children in autism could be better served by some, being more cost effectively served somewhere else. They can't. But that brings a lot of, questions up in this forum that really don't belong in this forum. That's really not.
Well, all right. In all fairness, the pursuant to section C9-4 of the town charter is, this meeting is for the purpose of discussing the appropriation request of the Board of Education. I don't want to keep going down to like you can or cannot ask this or that question. At some point, all these questions are going to be asked because we have to understand the budget. This is
the charter doesn't override the Public Act. Law is more than a charter, and there's a purpose for why it's set up that way. It's set up that way because, in this kind of forum, we're not really supposed to be rehashing all of those pieces of things. People can ask all kinds of questions in the budget process. The public does. But this, we just have to be careful that it doesn't look like there's grandstanding or polarizing when ultimately as part of the budget process, people will answer and ask questions and they get answered through that medium. And it's gonna, those kinds of things get published on a website, that type of thing.
Well,
So
I don't think anybody's trying to grandstand or be polarizing, but I respect your opinion on that. I don't think that's the purpose of any of these questions, but.
Well, no, I'm not saying that is what you're trying to do, but I'm saying that when you look at what the purpose of PA 1360 is, there's a reason why it's set up that way. That's all.
I do also want to point out that, we've actually gone through a lot of these questions that you're asking. They're on recorded session. They're on YouTube where we've gone through this budget line by line and have put many of these same questions that you're asking to Dr. Willett. So I just wanted to point that out there.
Thank you.
And I know I'm on mute, but I took myself off because I just wanted to jump in too. I mean, I definitely want to make sure that we do, because I know that there's two different portions of this, but if we could contain it to the non-educational questions right now. And I'm sure that if there's questions in terms of for Dr. Willett to answer or return, like about the programs or anything of that nature, I know he'd be more than willing to have those conversations, but I really think that this meeting should be containing to those non-educational items and getting everyone onto the same page of what can we do to be more efficient. And I don't think it needs to have this dialogue of back and forth where it seems like everyone's out at each other's throats. We don't need to have that. So I just think that, there are definitely questions about programs and having that conversation. It is valid to have that. And as Wadu pointed out, there has been a lot of just meetings going through everything. That's how I've kind of kept in touch with what's happening. I just think that at this point, I do think that we should try to get through all of the non-educational questions and then we can move from there.
Lowering your hand down there, Ashley. Lou? I'm going in order as they were raised, Dana. Lou's was, you're on mute, but Lou's was on my list next. Lou?
Thank you, Esther. And Dr. Well, I understand what you're saying. I'm reviewing the public action that you're talking about right now, and the whole thing is that it's saying that we, as a legislative body, should be able to get an explanation as far as what these expenditures are. I know that I agree. I don't want to belabor this issue, but it's something that we're not just focusing on a singular issue. We're focusing on the budget overall. But in order to do that, you need to see the forest through the trees, and that's sort of why we're asking it. Not necessarily pointing at that one specific expense, but just questioning overall on some of the expenditures so we can better understand it. That's really what it comes down to. But my questions have been answered at this point. If there's anything else, as I said, I'll get him to Dr. Willett in writing so that I can follow up with it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Brenda?
I got moved. I couldn't find the unmute. Brenda Falusi, Town Council. To the Board of Ed and Dr. Willett and everybody who worked on this budget, thank you so much. Many of the questions that I've been hearing so far have already been answered. As been stated in the budget presentation that was done on February 9th or 10th and in other meetings. From my understanding of number 3, it says recommendations and suggestions to the Board of Ed regarding consolidation of non-educational services. So what we're supposed to be doing at this point is making recommendations and suggestions. Doesn't seem like we're supposed to be making questions. I read in the documentations that this budget is has supported and is backed by every single member of the Board of Ed, that they approved the superintendent's budget after a couple adjustments that are coming down. After looking through everything, seeing that you did do some consolidations, you did do cost avoidance, and that you are ethically and morally taking care of our kids and providing them with an education they need, I have no problem with everything that's suggested for these non-educational services. And I thank you for your work. I think we all know what it feels like to be micromanaged. And I would love to be able to free up some more of your time so that you continue to do the good work that you have been given and entrusted by this town. Thank you.
Thank you. Dana? She disappeared.
Sorry, I lowered my hand versus muting. And I think that's what happened before is I had my hand up and then it came down and I put it back up. So I was waving. Sorry about that. I had a question to Dr. Willett because it sounds like some of the questions that have been brought up were definitely questions that we've either asked in FFC or in our multiple budget questions or people have asked during public comment, as well as have been submitted to your budget form online. Is that still readily accessible and available online for folks that can look at, because it sounds like some of the questions that are being asked have been asked on multiple occasions or have been at least asked once prior by the BOE. I just wanted to make sure our town council still has access to some of those resources other than our meeting minutes. Do they still have access to that online form submission where they can see some of the questions that have been answered, Dr. Willett?
I don't think.
I also
Yeah,
just
I
wanted
mean,
to point out
I
that
guess
they are on YouTube as well.
Well, I guess and again, this is such a touchy thing because, you know, it's so easy to take it and to sort of draw a judgment about the conversation we're having tonight, you know, AKA, you know, well, he doesn't want to answer these questions or you know, I think the point really is that there to what you're saying, you know, to answer your question specifically, the part of the budget process that we're engaging in, you know, there is, now that the Board of Ed has had its chance to go through and to ask and to pound on it and to make suggestions and through FFC and through all of these processes, which anybody can attend, you know, people can attend from the public and have, you know, they banged on it, asked a lot of questions, went through that process, and it ended in the Board of Ed's adopted budget. And the energy is spent really answering and doing that for the board. Now the energy does shift to, you know, any questions coming in from the public, any member of the public, whoever is part of the public can throw the questions out there. And the Q&A form then for the public starts getting developed now, where these get answered, no matter who the public member is. And I guess that's the point, is there are mechanisms, there have been mechanisms for understanding, and there are mechanisms for understanding. It's not towards any person here or anything. It's simply that really the purpose of this particular meeting, to give an example, I think Mr. Luba's questions about back office are a perfect example of an expense that is a you know, administrative expense. I really get nervous when we start talking about, you know, trying to find evaluations of special education programming, because you know, in order to really understand that takes a long time to really go through and understand. That's why you have a Board of Ed under 10222 statutorily separated to do that kind of thing. That's really not done in like an hour or 2 hours or even 30 pages of a document. There's a deep understanding that people get elected to the board and spend years developing. So that really has to be something that the board is saying, hey, this 319 represents our best way of doing this. That's an educational expense. And so it's no chagrin to anyone here. That's the domain, and that's how it's set up. But in back office, I mean, that makes total sense, whether I agree with or think CROG is, you know, advocacy or not, or whatever. That's a great example of a non-ed expense that I would expect questions about, and facilities even, and things like that. That is the real purpose of a meeting like this. So it's not disparaging anyone or saying anything like that. It's simply saying that this is the context for those conversations. The other things are really the domain of what it takes years to sort of develop and what ends up getting handed over in a budget. You know, it's not, special ed is not really a conversation in a town council zone.
Well, and Dr. Thank you. I just wanted to finish up my question, if you don't mind, Tammy. Sorry. Like, I mean, as a member of the FFC committee, and I'm sure my peers could say that we've, you know, even in FFC, we've really fine-tooth combed this, and it's been hours and hours and days and days and days that we've spent on this. And so, you know, like you said, it's not going to be answered this evening, specifically educational questions, administrative or, you know, facilities maintenance, those kind of things, absolutely, and different cost savings, like Ashley had made mention of, and really streamlining it. I was just trying to ask for my own information. If someone wanted to take the time to look through the hours and hours and hours to get the questions answered that they had this evening, because it's understandable that they have these questions, and unfortunately it probably couldn't come to every single BOE budget meeting, those kind of things. But again, I would assure you that, you know, the board, we unanimously supported this budget, and it wasn't an easy budget for Dr. Willett to put across our plate, and it was thrown back at him multiple times by several of us and many of us. So, I'd hope that, the due diligence that your board did in town would be looked upon, and looked at the resources that we have available, whether it be online or in our minutes or the YouTube or the online submission. I was just trying to see if that online submission was still visible, not to ask necessarily the questions, but to see your question and answers from previous questions from people from the public and the Board of Ed and those kind of things. That's kind of where I was going, if that was available for people to view still, Dr. Willett.
Yeah, we don't have a ton of public questions yet, but there are some that we'll be posting, now that the board has had its questions answered and we've finished that process. Absolutely. That site now, that Board of Ed budget site, that typically now propagates with all kinds of those kinds of pieces of information. And I think what might even still be up there from last year is the board is questions that came out of a meeting last year like that. So I think that's still there, and so some of those answers may still be relevant. But these new questions from the new budget, these will start being posted on the budget page. And so yes, basically submitting to the public, submitting any budget question, that budget question will be answered. Some may be combined because maybe 3 or 4 will be asking the same thing. But that's the part of the process we're entering right now, is where that Q&A doc now gets developed because the board process is complete.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you.
You're welcome. Griffin.
Thanks, Tammy. I just kind of actually had a couple of comments. I feel that just to kind of get everything back on track and maybe to alleviate some of the concerns of the council. For me personally, as the FFC chair, I've reviewed this budget extensively. I know former board members criticized me last year for being too detailed. But I feel that this year, that's actually allowed me to gain a better understanding of this entire budget process and the cost structure of the Tolland Public Schools. So this year I did take a little bit of a higher level approach, but while still focusing on priorities. And yes, we've had a lot of discussions with Dr. Willett and multiple FFC meetings, especially during January, where we really went through a lot of line items and we looked at a lot of things. So I just kind of wanted to put it out there that, I certainly support this budget, as, I know you expect, since I pushed it through to this point. And I do think it balances the interests of our students, our staff, and our community. So I just kind of wanted to put this out there to maybe alleviate any concerns you guys might have about kind of digging into the weeds, because I don't blame you, because I've been there myself, and I've dug into the weeds to gain an understanding, but I can certainly understand why you guys would want to as well, so that you really understand what we're putting forth and why we think that it is necessary for our students. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on that? So, okay. Technology, I had a question on that. We have now in district about 4,800 devices. Do we have a plan, a phase-in plan for replacing those devices? Because getting almost 4,800 or so devices in the matter of a year or two is a little scary when you start thinking about replacement.
Yes, the way that we had set up to do that in each of the schools, it's not an insurmountable amount, and it kind of comes into the same range as we would have done, replacing some of the older equipment in prior models of the way technology was used in education. There are some really great benefits to having made the transition that we've made, and having had the state support through those grants and things that that we put out there to get there. So, we're looking at a replacement cycle that we won't really have to do too much of replacing in the next year or two. About 2 years out, we'll start a replacement cycle in each of the schools that will amount to maybe $40,000 to $50,000 or so. to replace, antiquating equipment and put new ones back into the cycle. So for each of the schools, so it might be in the zone of maybe 200,000 in the district, maybe something 100 to 200,000, but that would not necessarily greatly exceed what we would be looking for, say, if we had to replace, labs or things like that in that time. It's also part of the offset that will start to happen, although it won't be immediate, is that there will definitely be a shift, although it's not going to happen immediately, from these printed methods of doing things to these electronic media oriented methods of things. There are certain areas where we won't need the textbook in the way that that people conceptualize it, at least the way that most of us would. These things are getting replaced by media resources, but that shift is not complete. It's still sort of happening. So, as we move forward, we will see some offsets to the technology cycle in the replacement cycle. And it doesn't have to be, say, the full 150 or so for the schools. It can be, a little bit less than that, because at that time, we will probably have some credits and some other things that, we will have achieved through leveraging equipment that's old and things like that, like we've done in the past. Some of these places will trade in old ones and give you new ones for a little less of the cost. Grants, we're always going and filing for grants. So I would say that probably looking a couple of years out, we'll look at a replacement cycle that's in that $100,000 zone, but it won't be ridiculously out of the range of what we would have been asking for to maintain the labs that we used to have. But this is just a much more effective model because the kids are using it as a tool in their everyday life, which is a great advancement from the way they were using technology in the past.
Okay, so just quickly, if we can, really quickly, you said 40 to 50,000 per year, and then you said between 100 and 200,000 for the district.
It's like per school, you're looking at about 40 to 50, and then it could be up to 200,000 for the school, because you're looking at a replacement cycle that starts in the low grade and goes up through the high. So, it's somewhere in that zone, but it'll probably be a little bit less than that. And it won't happen until maybe 2 years out or so.
Okay, then you had printer savings with CBS. Is that projected savings built into the budget on page 28? And if so, do you know where?
Page 28 of the Board of Ed budget?
Yeah, page 28, you said something about consolidating, managing printing services and copier services. You're paying per page now for no additional cost, greatly generated the benefit of the IT department by reducing its burden for printer repairs, as well as eliminating the need for budget for all those repairs.
We did and are going with a consolidation of who we use for those repairs and for those printing services. So yeah, and that is generally when we do those things, we always incorporate it into the budget.
Would that be in outside repairs though? Like where would that be in the non-educational expenses here? Well, you don't have to, again, if you don't have that, that's fine. You don't have to answer now. I can be sure to send you questions. I can try to consolidate everybody's questions if they have questions that we can't get to tonight. And then in the insurance cost and repair for the devices, is the insurance cost or repair for devices built into the budget?
It's part of what parent guardians pay. They can buy into an insurance cost for the repair of machines if they damage them.
So there's no cost to the district for repairs or replacements?
So there's always a cost to district on repairs of equipment, because we have equipment that isn't necessarily directly the ones the kids are using. For instance, Wi-Fi units and laptops that teachers may be using, that type of thing. But Chromebooks do have money collected from parent guardians to offset the cost of damage, so they can buy into insurance, and that does help us sustain the program, and it helps the parent, because if something happens, a couple times, they get covered on the basic things, unless there's an absolutely ridiculous, abuse going on. And so it covers both bases very well, and so far it's working very well.
Okay, then, let's see, Nancy, I noticed the bus transportation number was going down. And I thought last year when we negotiated the contract, it was going to go up. So I was wondering if you could maybe give a quick brief under review of why that would be going down. And also in your budget, you mentioned doing another extension, but I thought the idea that was brought up last year was that you guys were going to go out to bid when that contract was up.
Well, we're in a new contract right now, and the contracts are 3 years.
Mhm.
So we did do that year, and then, you know, that was something that was in the minutes of the board in a number of different conversations with respect to that exact issue. So going with first student was the best value. And
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
I'm specifically mentioning what you have in the budget. Was that you're going for another, it said specifically about going for another extension. And I thought at the time the discussion was to go out to bid, but more importantly, what I'm trying to figure out is it's a savings this year. And I had thought from the.
with the extension of the transportation contract, the district has been able to achieve consistency of personnel, improve route, and consistency of on-time performance, driver familiarity. That's the page you're referring to.
I didn't write the page number down on it. Is there a transportation? There is a transportation page, right?
Yeah, yep. Tolland most recently extended with first student transportation. The extension is for 3 years and it expires June 30th, 2023. 2021 is the beginning of a new contract. First student has been working, you know, on a 3-year extension. The existing terms and the conditions of the contract for student provided transportation for the last 13 years. The 3-year extension is, that language is talking about the 3-year extension.
The prior contract?
That we just did. Yeah, it should have been worded that we did do it.
Okay.
So the first sentence is talking about how we're in the 3-year contract. The second one talks about this is an extension of the current contract, but it's favorable because we got a number of different benefits out of it.
And is that why there's a reduction in transportation?
Probably that, and we've noticed we've been able to, well, and this is a tough thing to promise in a long span. For instance, if I'm talking about the entire year next year, these things can fluctuate because we can have needs arise that, you know, we're not sure about. But overall, you know, we have been able to do transportation more efficiently, yes. If we had a bunch of outplacements and we had to do transportation for them, they can be 20 to 30,000 each, and that might affect a line like that.
Right. It's always fluctuating. And is the elimination of the Honeywell fees in USIF? Is that in the USIF or is that in your energy budget?
Well, I mean, do we have a settlement yet with Honeywell?
Are you going with the assumption that we would or would not in the budget?
I think right now we're working in what we had in there for, you know, what we were obliged to be paying. If you're saying, for instance, if you're suggesting that the loan amount would be transferred to the town side under a bond, that would greatly reduce the need for the Board of Ed budget. It would be $670,000 the board wouldn't have to have in its budget if that's what you're suggesting.
No, and that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is the part of the Honeywell thing was you guys were paying for fees for.
Yeah, the M&V. Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about M&V fees.
Yes.
So,
yes.
You know, measurement and verification fees were paid. You know, you ended up paying, you know, 40 or 50,000 to recover 70,000 or something. So the differential was say 30,000 that you'd ultimately get back from such a process. So, you know, we probably have a plan in there for, you know, having, you know, these kinds of contingencies, but we never really made, as was the documentation provided for that, we never really made much back on that. So it's not a huge differential one way or the other at the end of the day. You know,
No, what I think what I'm getting at.
We have to plan on them until there isn't
right.
You know,
so if the settlement comes through, then that would be something that cost you could remove from the budget, because it's the assumption right now is that you're working off the same thing you did last year, which would be paying for the M&B fees.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I would have to go back and look to make sure where that's in, you know, but I suppose you'd look at maybe 30,000 of something like M&B.
Yep. Let me know if I have any other I think that's all that I have for the non-educational side of things. Does anybody else have anything else that would go on number 3 and not number 5 at this point? All right, then I think that gets us to.
Well, actually, I'm just looking at these notes. If you look at the notes at the end of page 31, I think the fees are eliminated from this budget because I think originally we didn't know where the settlement would be in January, but it looks like they were eliminated from this from January to February.
You point me to which note that is? Changes from the last? Is that
Yeah,
it?
they were pulled out because, you know, the original superintendent's budget, we weren't near that settlement. I think these have been pulled. The M&V fees were already reduced out of this budget now that I
They
look at
are.
it.
Okay, let me change my notes on that.
Termination of the Honeywell contract that eliminates the M&V costs and fees. So I am pretty sure those are out of here now. I don't think were originally being considered for that because we didn't have settlement. I think as of February 12th, they're out. Yes.
All right, change my note on that. Griffin.
Yeah, I was actually just curious, since we were talking about the Honeywell, if we move forward with the settlement with them, where does the, I think it was $200,000, where does that end up?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
I can answer that. Mike Rosen, town manager. So at about a week or two ago, council meeting, we did get an authorization for me to negotiate and sign an agreement with Honeywell and for the funds to be parked in the USIF fund. So the 200,000 from the settlement will be put into the USIF fund, the utility internal service fund. It's not a done deal yet. And actually, Dr. Willen and I spoke earlier today that when the final version of the settlement agreement is hashed out, the one remaining aspect is the warranty language still. That'll be brought before the Board of Education for your blessing. And then I will sign the deal after that point. So I expect within the next, not this Wednesday, but probably your next subsequent meeting, we'll be ready for that by that point.
And that is on our agenda for Wednesday too, is just an update on Honeywell, which will basically, Mike just did it, so maybe we can take it off. So that's one less agenda item for Wednesday, but yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay. With that being said, I think that gets us to number 4, and that's questions from the public with a 2-minute limit. We don't have Tony, do we? Oh, Steve. We have Steve. 2-minute limit, subject to specific to the Board of Education budget, with questions being directed by me to the appropriate body for response. So if it's a Board of Ed question, we'll go to the Board of Ed. If it's a town council's question, it will go to the town council. So nobody is new to Zoom here, but if you have a question, you can raise your hand. If you're on a device, state your name and address for the record. If you're on the phone, it is *9 and that will raise your hand. I will call on you in order of the hand being raised. At that point, you'll be able to ask your question as long as you're within the 2-minute limit and it's in regards to the budget we are talking about. All right, Kate Bello.
Hi there, Kate Ballo, 80 Tolland Green. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. I don't actually have a question. I just wanted to offer that I have had the pleasure of following the Board of Education budget closely over this past budget season. I've seen a tremendous amount of work that's been put into it. I fully support it, and I hope the town council will as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Kate.
Kate, Howard Bender, 103 Goose Lane. I have 2 questions, and one is more rhetorical than the other. First, I'd like to thank the Board of Ed for putting this budget through in such a unanimous fashion. It gives me hope for our kids and for our community that we are worth this investment. So I actually would just like to ask the town council if you are going to have the political will to support our community. That's really my whole question.
All right. Well, town council can answer that. I think across the board, Kate, this is the very beginning. We're trying to ask questions and figure out how it goes, but we have to look at the whole town and we will do so and then decide where the funding and what we can support from there. So can't answer that question on the very first budget meeting that we have, at least from my perspective. Does anybody else on the town council want to answer? Lou?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree 100%. I mean, it's a matter of where we need to do our due diligence to review the information that we have in order to determine everything. It's not a matter of political will. It's a matter of looking at what we have before us, and if it's appropriate for the budget and what the town can afford and what the town is willing to accept. I mean, we also, as part of this budget, we also have to be cognizant that we will be going hopefully towards a town referendum, and it's a matter of putting something together that we think is that both boards feel is appropriate. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Brenda?
Yes, thank you, Brenda Felucci. I believe that the Board of Ed did their due diligence. They submitted a modest investment into our community. And I believe that it is morally and ethically valuable. It's the correct programming for our schools. It's the correct answer to see a unanimous approval for this budget and to watch all of the meetings, read all of the minutes, take a look through the budget. You should be commended on an absolutely wonderful budget season for creating this and crafting this for our community. Since I am seeing that the Board of Ed has unanimous support, I don't see anything that's coming forward so far that would move me away from also supporting the Board of Ed budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, I would concur with some of Councilor Felucci's comments just to answer Kate Bender's question. In addition, I think going back to our capital budget public hearing where there's a lot of discussion regarding the firehouse project, there is political will and political capital, I think, that can be expended, or at least engagement with various groups and organizations to encourage turnout, however that is realized or actualized by the state in terms of how we can run our referendum. I'm hoping that it is run the same way as our August primary and November general election were run, if not fully in person, allowing for those who have immunocompromised situations have the opportunity to vote absentee due to COVID. So I think there is an opportunity for counselors to be engaged with the Board of Ed and work together as we are right now to encourage and promote the highest turnout possible to have a favorable budget.
Thank you, Steve. We are going to go to Liz next. Liz Costa.
Hi, everyone. Liz Costa, 54 Josiah Lane. First of all, I'd like to thank the BOE for coming together to put together this budget. I saw a collegial and collaborative effort on this and was really appreciated, just both in the tone this year and in general. Really appreciate that. And this is a budget that supports our teachers, our parents, and staff who have given so much to this town in a year that's been incredibly difficult for them. And I just ask you as a town council to really support this. The outcome of this pandemic will likely not be seen educationally or in a mental health capacity for years. So I just ask you to continue to support this and don't include the potential dollars that the federal government will give to Tolland, because those will probably be dollars that we need to spend in the future to help students that have either fallen behind or have mental health issues as a result of this. So again, thank you, and I hope you all support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda. Scheidel? Is it Scheidel?
Scheidel.
Scheidel, sorry.
That's okay. Hi, Linda Scheidel, 81 Morgan Lane. Respectfully, I do not view ranking 133 out of 166 in per pupil expenditure as a long-term great value. Over the years, we have lost many programs in our schools due to unsupported budgets or the push for a 0% increase. To name a few, an art class in high school, health at TIS, and foreign language at the elementary level. The students in high school now have more support in their earlier years of education than the current elementary students do. If the town council doesn't support our Board of Ed budget and or continues to push for 0% increases, we won't continue to see the success at the high school level as we do right now. We also won't be able to attract the amazing teachers that we have today. If the town council doesn't want to put this on residential tax revenues, then you as a town council needs to do a better job bringing in commercial tax revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Annalise Sear.
Hi, Annalise Sear, 34 Columbine Road. So I just have a question. First, I want to say that the children in our schools, they spend most of their life, most of their time throughout the week between the walls of a school. And it's not, they're not just there to learn science and math and reading. It's also, they're a whole person. They need social support, mental support, emotional support, physical support. They need a wholesome, holistic, and to be supported in all ways. And Dr. Willett explained that we have seen such a high rise in mental and emotional struggles with our children, and the need for a counselor full time. I just recently, I've had many situations where, thank God, we have a counselor at the school. I don't even know if she's full time, but with my son. And I just wonder why, especially between COVID, between race relations, between bullying, all of these things that our children are struggling with in this day and age, why are we looking to, to have a counselor, to share a counselor? Why are we not seeing that that's just a basic necessity? It's not something that really should be even considered. These children, they need that support. And if your children go to the school or any school, don't you want them to be to have all of the support that they need, even integrating and including all children, regardless of any special needs? That should just be it's the only fair and ethical solution. So why are we looking to possibly kind of look to consolidate in that area?
That's not my time, right? If that's Annalise's or something.
Right in time, Annalise. You got it right under 2 minutes. Okay, anybody else have a question? I think in general, Annalise.
Amber hand up at one point, but I don't know if they put it back down or if they decided not to speak.
Yeah, I don't see anybody else's up at this point. Okay, without seeing anybody else's.
Are we going to hear the answer to Annalise's question?
Okay, please, everybody stay on mute.
Mike or someone that has admin host controls could mute whoever's on.
Yeah, so, all right, let's see. So I guess your question was, I don't think we're not suggesting any cuts to anything yet. We're trying to understand it. And that is our role as the town council, is to understand the budget in full, because ultimately the budget decision gets made at the town council level from a whole dollar perspective. And then what the Board of Ed does with it is their purview. So in order for us to be able to pass through a $1.3 million increase, it's incumbent upon us to ask the questions and understand what's in that budget and whether or not we can support that as a town, as the whole town. So that's the purpose of this, is for us to ask those questions. It's the purpose of this meeting, is for the Board of Ed to present their budget to us and us to ask questions. So I don't think questions are an indication of what anybody is doing. It's an indication of us trying to understand. At least that's my opinion. Brenda?
Hi, Brenda Flusey, Town Council. For me, my trust is in the Board of Ed, in Dr. Willett, and all the administrators and everybody that went together to create this budget. I do not support, I would not support, if it was up to me, outsourcing anything to do with mental health. We need those supports, especially during these times for our kids, to directly answer your question. I don't believe that it is my purview, it is my responsibility to understand everything line by line and go through and micromanage what the Board of Ed has already done during this budget process. I really appreciate their work and all the questions that they had through this whole process, and listening to them formulate this budget has been an eye-opening experience, and it's been very educational. If any of you follow me on social media, you know I've been following budgets for over 12 years now. I've been posting them up on social media for people to see and encourage people to be in. And I totally agree that this is a many-year process to become familiar with everything that comes under the Board of Ed budget purview. Again, I thank you for your time. Again, I don't feel that I need to look at everything, but if I have questions on programs specifically, I know where to go and where to find those answers. And I appreciate all the different avenues that we have in order to get those questions answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Lou.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think just to use a term that's been thrown around a few times here, I think that the town council, we're morally and ethically bound as well to ask these questions so that we can understand where things are going for. It doesn't mean pulling apart each thing line by line. The Board of Education has done an outstanding job presenting the budget to us. Using, when I was bringing up the issue of the possibility of splitting a school social worker or a counselor, that's just an example, and that's just a question to see where we stand with this push. This is something that has been going on and growing within the state and within the state legislature for some period of time, looking to cut costs and capitalize on regionalized assets. That's what it was. It's more of looking to see where we are in this and if there are any avenues. That was one example. We discussed, there's many other avenues, such as the secretarial staff, such as administrative staff, other positions. So I don't want to think people that we're just focusing on that one issue to eliminate it. That's not my objective. That was to just ask the question to see where we stand on some of these issues. So, but again, it is as a town council, we are morally and ethically obliged to ask these questions so that we can make sure not to second guess the Board of Education, but to see where we stand. So when we propose an overall budget, that we have a sound overall budget for the entire town, of which the Board of Education is part of. We ask the same questions for all of our other boards, for all of our other supervisors, for all of our other departments. The Board of Education is not any different than anyone else that we've asked these same questions to, including Mr. Rosen on many other expenditures. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As it's been said, this isn't a matter, I'd like to address a couple of the comments that were made. It's not a matter of having political will to pass a budget. It's not a matter of going line by line through a budget. It's a matter of trying to gain the best understanding we can so we can make an informed, intelligent decision, which is best for the town. So, you know, as we work through this process, questions are going to come up. And maybe sometimes the questions will be repetitive if we haven't been able to make all the meetings. So, you know, from my view, the Board of Ed has put in a lot of work in this budget. Nobody has said anything about passing a zero budget. So, you know, when we talk about this, as questions come up, we appreciate the answers. I certainly appreciate the answers. I have a few questions that I had about the budget, but as to what's been said tonight, I might have to step back and see if I can figure these things out on my own before I ask other people to spend their time answering these things. So that's all I have. Thank you.
I mean, I will say, just as an aside, anybody who wants to spend some time with me, I'll spend, you know, hours kind of meeting if people wanted to. And that's true of any community member. You know, I've offered it before. I'll sit down and go over any aspect of it. and happy to do so. And I think I just want to make sure that it's clear. I don't think anybody has a problem with questions. I think it's simply that, you know, this particular Public Act 1360 talks to a process that that is generally, non-education expense. And there's a reason, because the Board of Ed is elected to provide oversight on education and then provide the best budget that considers complicated issues like special ed that may not be adequately covered, say, one-page document or in 1 hour meeting. That's why they're elected, to make sure that the services are appropriate. And then they recommend a budget to the town based on that.
Dana.
Dang, I have the new update. I couldn't find the unmute. Although my hand's still blue. I don't know if I'm supposed to be responding at this point. But first of all, I'd like to thank the folks in the public who did raise their questions and concerns. I want to thank my peers that worked tirelessly over this budget. And I want to thank the town council for asking the questions. And although, sometimes we do have to ask questions multiple times to understand it, because I wouldn't want to, as a member of the public, I wouldn't want the folks that we elected officials to represent us as members of the town inappropriately. I wouldn't want them to just check the box and pass it. So I'm appreciative of the questions. I'm appreciative what Mr. Reagan said, doing some digging. But there are some things upon that digging that we might need some more clarity on it. So again, I just want to thank everybody for their time, for what we're doing, and again, for my peers working together and as unanimously approving this budget. I think we've come a long way as a team, and I think that's huge for the public to see. And Ms. Scheidel, I don't disagree with you being the low per person expenditure. I would expect us to move up the ranks in that. We have a lot of work to do as a Board of Ed going forward over the years, the next handful of years, recovering from opportunities of loss in years past and previous budgets. But we are very lucky that we had the TEPTO, and I don't know if I believe it was $30,000 that funded part of our Chromebooks this year to help us through the pandemic to get to the 1-to-1. Those kind of things. We're very lucky for a lot of the folks in our community that have supported our BOE. And I would just hope that our town council will continue to do their due diligence to work as a team as we did as a Board of Ed. And I don't see any reason why we can't. So I just want to thank everybody for their time and the opportunity to present this or support Dr. Willett in presenting this evening. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Dana. All right, I don't see any questions or anything. Any more questions? So I am going to go on to number 5, petitions and/or questions to the Board of Education from town council members specific to the Board of Ed budget. Does anybody have anything specific before I do? Lou? See if you can ask any of mine.
Now, during last year's budget, and again, this would be primarily to Dr. Willett, but to the BOE as an overall. During last year's budget's discussions, there was a lot of times where there was brought up the issue of having to cut back on staff, firing teachers. I think specifically it was the 5th grade teacher and the art teacher that were supposedly, or that were during the discussions put on the chopping block. Were there any reductions in the teaching staff during last year's budget? Just as a starting point.
I know that we did. I think we also had people that we transferred around last year because of that. So for instance, in the 6th grade, we made a change so that we could cover. I think this year, with respect to losses, and what we've tried to do is we've tried to be very careful not to compromise programs. So people that were reduced, we try to take reductions from retiring positions or people that that aren't necessarily going to have a super negative impact. So we do try to find ways when we are looking to reduce to kind of offset retirements and that type of thing. But last year, I think we had we did reduce from, as I'm recalling, from, it ended up being in 6th grade that we ultimately made that reduction, which shut down. We had to consolidate the teams so that we couldn't teach with 2 people on ELA in each team. And instead it was 1, and we made a interventionist out of that job and reduced it. But I have to go back and look because I have so much budget in my head right now, you know. I'm trying to recall exactly what came down from last year on that, but I believe that was how it ended up falling out. Was it the loss was really felt more in 6th grade.
Okay, well, so, but again, but I remember that we were specifically stating that when we were discussing it, you needed to eliminate that 5th grade teacher and that art teacher. Was that a specific reduction?
I believe that it was, yeah.
No, so they were fired, or was it just a reduction in number from due to retirement or other?
I believe we were able to reduce it from a retirement, but I'd have to go back and look at that to make sure that I'm giving you the 100% accurate. But I believe that was how we were able to do it, was a reduction. But you know, I'd have to go back and look.
All right, and then another question I have is that based upon the initial presentation, that you were saying that we're down to 21 to 22 students for an average class size, and that in looking at the overall student population that I believe we've lost approximately 90 to 100 students overall. Is that about accurate?
I have to look back at enrollment to see, but you know, what we have done is we've had a ratio of about 20. I'm trying to remember here. Hold on one second.
Actually, Dr. Willett, that was one of my questions, because the exhibit that's in the budget right now, the numbers don't match. So that might be something you want to look at. I did have a question.
I mean, I'm not sure. If you're talking about the presentation I did, it was sort of, these were averages. You know, we have over the last, I say 6 to 21 in the document here, you know, there has been a reduction of teaching staff commensurate with enrollment. So if the question is about enrollment, there definitely has been. There's about 40 some odd less teachers now than there were, say, in 06 and 010, for instance. You know, if we did a run like that, you'll see a noticeable difference in the number of teachers we have, to the tune of, depending on where you set the marker, the 30 or 40. So it's really, you know, whenever you're talking about overall FTE though, you know, we have paras and we have different kinds of staff that are support staff. They have to be brought in for one-to-one, or they have to be brought in for intervention supports, SRBI, RTI. But teachers, straight from, you know, if you look at a school system, you know, in terms of how generally it is viewed with a teacher and, you know, per, you know, teacher per student teacher ratio, that type of thing. We have definitely in Tolland made that adjustment, and you know, that can be demonstrated pretty directly. But we have, from the span of time to now, really adjusted for enrollment at a ratio of about 1 teacher to every 21 students, roughly, and that can bump up and down. But it's still in the range of about 20 that, you know, the ratio exists. So the Tolland has made its adjustment for enrollment, and enrollment now is actually targeted to go up, especially in the next few years. We'll see that increasing in the lower grades, and we have the data to demonstrate that too, and the projections also show that. So, you know, enrollment, we have reached an equilibrium with respect to enrollment. Tolland should not be making massive downward adjustments for, you know, in the name of enrollment at this point anymore. And the other thing to keep in mind is special services requirements have gone up exponentially in the last decade. So what we weren't expected to do before, districts are expected to do now. And so, you know, even if, say, you have a static overall size of staff, or we see an overall, say, increase in the number of pairs, for instance, that's because the Tolland Public Schools are covering the bases and avoiding, really, again, it comes down to cost avoidance. If you don't put those people in place, you're not fulfilling the education program, and people will challenge that. It'll end up costing a lot more in the long run not to adequately place people where you need them. So, you know, that's part of the picture right now. And it's not just us, it's everywhere. But is in terms of teachers, actual teachers, and student teacher ratio, we have definitely made that adjustment to the tune of somewhere in the zone of 40 over the span of years as enrollment has decreased.
And then the last question I have, Madam Chair, is that last year when we were in the discussions regarding the teacher's contract and the issues of the what ended up being a 9% increase over a period of 3 years, that there was also a discussion of, or I believe this year it was $330,000 that was listed as an increase in the wages based upon the raise. And at the time that we were discussing this, that I believe that you, Dr. Willett, as well as members of the Board of Education, stated that that you would look to find a way to see about offsetting some of these expenses. And I'm looking to see if that if there has been a way to find. Did you find that way to offset it? Was that something that was that was covered as part of this budget, as opposed to just a base increase for that amount?
I probably need to understand your question a little bit better with respect to, because I'm not quite sure I fully get what you're aiming at there. But I would say, there are things we're doing right now, for instance, that have transitioned jobs that used to be consulting that were charged. It was costing us too much for a consultant. For coaches, for instance, for the TTA program.
Looking specifically at the raises that were the 9% raises that were passed. And
well, but I mean, you're speaking of 9%, as a number, but that's over 3 years, and there's data to suggest that the bargaining unit agreement was very favorable towards Tolland. And that's in the budget document.
I know, and we discussed that last year during the budget. But my question is that during that discussions, that it was intimated to the town council, I believe, and other members could correct me if I'm wrong, that you, Dr. Willett, as well as the Board of Education, will look at ways to offset these expenses so that it would essentially result in essentially a 0% increase as far as the overall budget. I mean, if I'm misunderstanding that, then you could correct me, or any other town council members could correct me. But I believe that's what was presented, and I'm looking to see what steps were done to sort of do that.
Well, I think last year at the end of the year in the Board of Education minutes, there's a series of documents called the phase documents. Those phase documents, or phases of the end of the year, described exactly how the Board of Ed was going to try to offset the impacts that were being asked of it, and also to try to make a transfer over of funds to help create that coronavirus relief fund that is both a board and town endeavor. So those minutes show a lot of what the offsets were. And yeah, I mean, we've constantly worked on offsets. In fact, one of the offsets was me taking a 0%. Another one of the offsets was us not hiring a vice principal this year and having our athletics director do a vice principal and athletics director job. We definitely have implemented offsets, both small and big, to try to make sure that we could come within the range and keep things going, with what was available to us, which again is the town council's purview. What is available is what we have to try to work with. But but we're always trying to do that. Another example is, wherever we maybe don't need to hire right away. If there's maybe a few weeks in between a position that maybe someone had left, and there may be a 2-week or 3-week period over a holiday or through a certain span of time, that hiring process will try to include a few weeks of differential to save the district money if there isn't going to be a massive benefit to placing the person immediately. Every day, every single day, the consideration is how can we make the most out of this dollar? So it's illustrated both in the phase documents of last year in the minutes. They're available online and I think through eCode. But it's also available in many, many different things that we're doing, you know, on a day-to-day basis to do that, as well as some of the more blatant things like not hiring that vice principal for the year, even though we desperately need it. And that means that there are heroics of people going on right now. I mean, the high school principal and the athletics director are doing amazing things right now. And that's across the district where people are, you know, working very hard to take on, you know, additional things to try to get through these tough years, you know, knowing and hoping that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Even the conversation like the assistant superintendent looking next year, be very you know, it's something that would cost $170,000, and we're trying to find a way to do that for $40,000. You know, we're not, you know, that would have been an easy wave to ride because there's a need, it's well demonstrated, and there was support. But even with that, you know, wave to ride, I have said many times, I don't think that that's the right way to go. I think we can do it with 40, and that's what this budget settled on. So in the little things and the big things, we're constantly trying to find a way to stretch that dollar. And that has, if you're looking at our budgets, if we really compared them across the board to even other places, having, you know, an average 3 years of less than a 1%, and even a 5 year at less than 1% as an average, that doesn't come without that kind of action. Those actions are constant on our part, trying to make sure that we're balancing and adjusting to what we're provided, you know. And then you'll notice that though in a budget cycle, there can be a few years that happen like that, but then there tends to have to be a year where it bumps up from there. And that does tend to be how this works. If there's a few years where it is less than 1, there tends to be a year where it has to be a higher point than that in order to make sure that we're not severely compromising you know, the education process that the town would want us to have. Because if we don't do it, we end up paying more later in you know, in a way that's not as publicly seen. The cost of certain things, if we don't have those services in place, SLPs and ABAs, that costs a lot more outside of public session, months and 6 months, 8 months later when we're challenged on our programming and we have to provide it, you know.
Well, and I appreciate the thorough answer, Dr. Willett. The reason why I'm asking this is because constituents have already asked me about that, where they remember the last year from the teachers' raises, and now some of them are unemployed, and they're asking, well, you know, about this. And I appreciate that because it's more of us understanding it so that when we go to our constituents and talk to them about it, we can say that, yes, we've looked into this and this is what's going on. So I appreciate you referring me to those documents. I'll make sure to take a look at them, and I appreciate the thorough answer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And if they don't provide what you're looking for, just give me a call and I can try to understand it better and help.
I have no fear about that. Thank you.
Lou, I just wanted to add to your what you were saying. I was just going through the booklet, and I was on page 24 and 25 have more of the enrollment and the personnel and staffing numbers. So if you need to have further look into it, that's where to find it.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at, Ashley. Page 25 doesn't tie. Numbers don't match. If you look at column on the top, 2021, it says total enrollment is 2,281. And if you look at the grid right underneath it, it says 2021 enrollment is 2,308.
Well, that's because if you look at it, it actually says, the asterisk says enrollment as reported to the SDE as of October 1st of every year, because there's an official enrollment number, but then there's the actual enrollment from a data run of January 12th. So to give you an idea, we had on October 1st, 2,281. By January 12th, we were up to 2,308. That's what we have now. So that's a good example of how in education things can fluctuate. October 1st, we were at a figure that's almost 30 kids lower than where we are right now. And so that's a perfect example of how, and so you're just kind of looking at that. That's why it says enrollment as reported to the SDE. That's your October 1st number versus your actual to date projection.
All right, so then by that means for your projection, we're losing 91 kids from this current year that we're in to this budget that you just gave us.
Well, so basically, if I can share the screen again, Mike, I'll show you where we're headed in the next few years. But 2,308 is actually our updated projection as of January 1st. Every single year we do this, the number that you see following it, like in the year forward, that includes information available at the time, but you'll notice that the January 12th number of 2,308 is going to be higher than what was projected in last year's budget because it's using, what we can use from what we know at the time. But those numbers every year after this year tend to be lower than what we actually have. And so, that's the thing is you're not losing anywhere near what you might think you are, and you're reaching an equilibrium at this point. And it's important to kind of understand that as a community that we're very much reaching this equilibrium. So if I can just need a second to kind of hold that up, but
well, I see we're in like future years out, we're going.
No, this is a very
here and there, but
yeah,
we're still projecting down for the next.
No, you're not though. You're really not projecting down now. If I can show you something, just give me 1 second. If I can just show the screen, you are in a short span of time, but in the long span, you're no longer going down as a district. And so let me show you this. I don't know. Can I still share the screen, Mike? Is that still something I can do?
Yeah, you can. You're a co-host. Yep.
Okay, so let me just try to get that back. Move that up. So in general terms, these enrollment figures can be a little bit tricky because of the way that, everything is kind of short throw when there's a lot going on that it sometimes is hard to see in the long span of time. So, those things are generally year to year, and they sometimes can undershoot. You'll notice that while you are going to go down a little bit here as you go through the years, did I share that? Yeah. You're going to go back up, and you'll notice that in particular, where you're starting to go back up again is the lower grades. So in 2021, 464 for pre-K2, then 21, 22, 22, 23, all the way through 26, you're going to 485 to 521 to 536 to 557, and then back to the 540s. But you're heading back up almost 80 to 100 kids in the pre-K2. You'll start to notice on the lower end, those numbers start going back up. And so while you are going to go down a little bit, you're also going to go back up again at a threshold. It looks like it's going to happen around, somewhere in the zone of those kids who are coming in birth year 2020, the 2025-26 year, you do start to dip down and then back up. So the district is never really going to leave this particular zone. You've made a lot of adjustments for enrollment. You're never really going to leave this 2,200. You're going to stick around this 2,200 probably for another 10 years is what it's projected to be. And most of your pickups, you're picking them up in the lower grades and, beyond the 10 years.
The higher grades, yeah.
You're going to end up getting those bigger numbers back in the higher grades. So the reason why you're even at the 2,200 level 10 years out is that your lower grades haven't made it all the way through the higher grades yet. So that number may even be edging upwards. So the point is that you have made your adjustment for enrollment. Truly you have. And so while I'll update it, I try to update it each year in these documents. And I use figures that are consistent from budget booklet to budget booklet, or try to. What I'll try to qualify in there is I'll try to show you the difference between like our October 1 number and then our actual number as of January 1st. And it does show those kinds of fluctuations where Tolland's never going to leave the zone, or probably for the next decade will not leave the zone of approximately where you are right now. And that's about 2,200 with, the fluctuation that you kind of see sometimes where we can pick up 20 or 30 kids in the span of a few months. And that makes that's hard to plan for. And you do see that, but we tend to have lower projections than what we actualize. And that's been true for many, many years, that what is on paper for the future tends to be less than what we end up having. And I can't tell if that's just, if there's the silence is because my mic is cut out, or that if there's just no one speaking.
No, we can hear you all.
Okay.
But I see John's hand is up. I don't know if we want to let him go next. And I thought Kurt's was up. I don't know if he put his back down. So I'd say John's unmuted. So if you have questions, I'd say take it away.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple questions on a couple outliers I noticed on the object budget information page, which would be 16. If just in general terms, if we could get a little background around, especially line number 325, PD and other professional services, pretty significant increase there. So if we get some clarity around that, Dr. Willett.
Page 6, you talking 19 or page 16?
Page 16, and it's line number 325.
I think he's talking about the budget view. I think maybe his is different on his computer.
Yeah, because I'm not seeing the same thing for
Object budget information. Is that it, John?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Willett, page 19 of your.
Yeah, it's 19.
Okay.
My apologies.
John, I think it's different on the computer versus our binders.
Okay,
You're talking about pupil services, professional services, or which line?
Yep, line number 325.
Okay. So line number 325, PD and other ed services, basically in that number, there's about $75,000 for autism programming, 72,000 for special education programming of Literacy How. There's about 25,000 of EastCon co-teaching program, which is also training and special education related. A very large chunk of that is training special education services people, crucial training to make sure that we're keeping them up to speed and making sure that we can provide the services and can say in a meeting that we've trained individuals with X, Y, or Z, because that will come up. And if people aren't, trained in X, Y, or Z, people will say, well, then you can't adequately serve the student. Another thing to keep in mind is something like Literacy How is a phonics program. And one of the biggest problems that people have had is if you can't adequately address phonics at the lower grades and in this special populations or exceptional populations, that turns into very quickly much larger problems. And dyslexia, the state of Connecticut made a real hard shift on what it expects districts to be able to provide and do with respect to dyslexia. And without programs that help with phonics, a district would leave itself with a very big hole with respect to serving students in that way. Other related programs are things like Spire, things like that. So the district, that's one of the examples of district making a strategic move to make sure that those bases are covered, so that when we end up in a meeting, we can say, when someone says, what have you done to provide phonics? What have you done to provide such and such instruction? We can say, these are the things we've done. This training has been provided, and these services have been provided to the kids. So, just rough shot off the top of my head, that those are a very, very large chunk of that line. Those are the things that we need. We also did reduce Literacy How last year as part of the phase documents. It's one of the things we had to make sure we were bringing back into the budget for fiscal year 22.
Okay, so those services you mentioned, those are things that we hadn't had before?
Well, in this particular example, some of these things, some of them are things that we didn't have before, that we have to adjust to, that we need to make sure we see these things kind of coming over the horizon, and we make adjustments to make sure that we have appropriate training to cover the bases in those areas. But something like Literacy How, we did not fund last year. In some sense, we didn't fund at all, and we offset funds that we have to come back out of and reacquire in fiscal year 22. And so that's part of that phase document too, as well. Some things that were, that end of year funds were utilized for, now in fiscal year 22, we have to make sure we have. And that was always part of the plan, to have Literacy How be in the district and under development with our staff. So it's been part of our plan, and it's something that, was part of the budget. was reduced a bit and offset with end of year funds. And now we have to make sure is back in for fiscal year 22 to cover the bases we were looking to cover.
Okay, very good. And then line 641 for textbooks. We're about tripling the cost on textbooks. And my thinking was, I thought we were moving more to online. So these are physical textbooks that we're talking about?
I mean, it's the increase is driven by language arts, math, and science. The reason is that, and what I had prefaced with before was, that is where it's going. The companies can make more money if they don't have to produce a paper book and they can sell you a digital product. It's less that they have to produce. But the age that we're in right now is a transition age. So many times, you're buying, for instance, the pilots, there's a math pilot right now. You do have to make an investment in some of these things. But eventually, and often they'll sell you this, and there's a media component to it, and then we notice that eventually the media component takes over, and they're offering only the media component. It also has to do, I think, with some things that I have to go back and look at that line specifically, but I think it's also some consumables, some things that the kids write in as well. That end up being part of it. But the years where we're transitioning away from those texts, that's going to be, the next few years. It doesn't happen immediately. So that's generally why you'll see that we still have to make some of those purchases. And many of them will have media components, and eventually they'll probably be only a media component.
Okay, so that's probably the similar answer to my question on line 646, curriculum workbook materials. 149% increase in that. So I imagine the answer is similar.
It's LA and math workbooks mainly.
Okay, and then my last question on that page is line 730, the equipment. We talked about a lift before. Is that included in that line item?
Which line?
Or is that, I'm sorry, 730? Actually, it says instruction, probably not, but it says
no. No, the articulating lift is not part of that.
Okay. So what would that include then?
It's Promethean boards. It's connection, it's Apple products and these connecting supports for our students in special education. The Promethean boards are a big part of it. They are replacing smart boards. The smart boards used to have a short throw projector and a board and software. Those were installed years ago, and they're dying, and they're being basically the short throw projectors. The lights are extremely expensive, and those units are dying. So this is replacing the units with the newer generation of the technology, which is called a Promethean board. So that equipment is cycling out the old smart boards, cycling in the new Promethean boards, and that is part of that expense.
Okay, very good. That's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kurt, can you talk now?
Yes, I can. Well, I couldn't hear you before, so maybe that was a problem. So my question has to do with the presentation. There was a section talking about the remediation of the part of this budget is dealing with remediation of problems arising from COVID and remote learning and whatnot. So there was a talk of increase in interventions and support. Do we expect that at some point there's going to be a return to a baseline in these expenses, or is this going to be, for lack of a better term, the new normal?
Well, I think it's very hard to say. I would say this, that the speech and language needs are way up, and maybe after a couple of years, they'll be able to go back down again, and maybe we can rebalance with retirements, things like that. But it's hard to know how long the impacts of this will stretch out for. We know that, that they're a big part of the picture right now. So I would say that maybe 2 or 3 years out, there could be some rebalancing depending on, and that would be done kind of offsetting retirements. Maybe somebody's retiring and maybe we don't replace it. But I would say from what I can tell in the meetings that we're having now, we're looking at least a 2 to 3 year impact of this. And we want to adequately cover it because to not do so just sort of exacerbates the impact. Children who do not receive the necessary speech and language services at the right age, there is a window that you can miss. And if you do miss that, they have an exponentially harder time. And that means that their needs are more as they get older. So covering this now may mean that we are able to put our finger in the dam. And that's why, as I said before, you can go a few years in, budgets, you can see that there are sometimes trends of these lower budgets, but every once in a while within them, there has to be one that's higher than the others. And this is an example of that. Like this year, there isn't one position in this budget that if we didn't have, wouldn't cost us more in the future, especially because of the pandemic. And those SLPs and ABA and ELL, those positions, those are of specific populations that if you don't address them one way, you absolutely must address them another. So, probably 2 or 3 years out, we can look at, what can get stabilized here. But this is a 2 or 3 year out thing. And it is following a cycle that, if we do have a 3 years, say, have a less than one, we really do need to consider a year that's higher.
Thank you.
Thank you. Flor?
I was just going to say a lot of these questions are questions that I think I saw answered in our Board of Education document. Is that, and forgive me for not knowing this because I just look at it on the dashboard, is that publicly posted, Dr. Willett, that, because I don't want the council to have to go dig for things. I mean, they're asking some awesome questions and some great questions. I just feel like there's some very elaborate answers that they might appreciate reading on that particular document.
Yeah, well, that's where we are in the process right now, is transitioning that to like the public Q&A. And so a lot of questions, that they do get published. That's kind of what we do now. Okay. And frankly, unfortunately, this year, we've had a lot of things pop up in front of us. So, the focus was making sure the board had all of its answers, and now the focus is getting those same kinds of things published out there for public Q&A. So the next couple of weeks, people will see that propagating, and the board site will have more and more and more. And I think by the end, that budget site that's off of www.tolland.k12ct.us, and budget is at the top. It ends up going many pages long, which is typically what happens as these things, get posted. So yes, the answer is yes. That information will be conveyed. Sometimes people ask questions in ways that the grammar isn't quite exactly what they would have been doing if they were knowing it would be published on the internet forever, and et cetera, et cetera. So we don't necessarily use the exact verbatim, but we use the example of the idea. If they're asking about a line, then we report out on that kind of relationship in that line versus the exact question.
Is that something though that you could send to the council before?
I wouldn't send the whole thing, blanket to the council, because people don't necessarily ask their questions in that venue, thinking that every aspect of their question, as syntactically written or shared. But I retype out the whole thing, the answers that basically are the core of what you're saying. That is going to be published for the entire community, and the council will definitely, can go and grab that too.
If they're going to deliberate on and I'm talking about you guys in the third person, sorry. If you guys are going to deliberate on our budget, in the next couple weeks, I'd love for them to see the answers before it's published for the public. And I just assume everything's subject to FOIA anyway. So, questions.
Yeah, I mean, they'll definitely be available to them, as they look at this.
Yes, Madam Chair, I think building on that, I'd like to see all the documents that you have. I mean, I'd rather see everything, in its raw form, so that we can see what the questions are and be able to see what the answers are.
Well, you definitely can. I mean, it's no skin off my back. It's just that the issue is that I think when people ad hoc threw their questions in there. They threw them in a certain methodology. So, I mean, FOIA, yeah, everything that's there can be easily put out anywhere else. It's simply that, trying to pull together a cohesiveness. If 3 different things were asked 3 different ways, answering that, some questions, for instance, out of the 70 or 80 or whatever, they ask the same thing. So, it can get confusing. And so that was done as a timestamp stream of consciousness as those things came in. But maybe 3 of those questions actually ask the same question. And the answer, the answer is really can be consolidated, because that was sort of just to make sure it got done. And it makes it even more understandable because, that it's a comprehensive answer, whereas instead you're scrolling through things that have the same question asked many different times. So it serves the public to make it direct, but I don't really, whatever's desired can be easily done. But when I publish it for, say, the website, it probably makes sense to answer the question once, instead of the thing that has it asked 3 times.
I understand, as far as for public dissemination, but I think for us, because everyone keeps going back, well, this is something that was asked by to the Board of Ed. This was something that was asked by the Board of Ed, and we don't have that information. So we're starting out in a vacuum other than what we can read that's out there right now. And if it's not out there right now, then we don't know what's been asked. So we're looking, I hate saying we're looking like idiots because the Board of Ed is out there saying, oh, hey, yeah, well, we've already gotten this. Well, we don't know what you've seen. We don't have that information. So that's something that would have been extremely helpful for all of us to get in advance so that we would be able to at least see what was asked beforehand, so that we're not standing here spending now 2.5 hours asking questions that probably could have already been answered and have already been answered by the Board of Ed. And so we could focus in our questions a little bit more. So if that's something that you could get out to us on the town council level, before the next meeting, I'd appreciate that, because that's something that I think would go a long way to help us see, as far as what's already been covered.
Yeah,
I
don't think anybody looks like an idiot here. I think it's just a matter of that particular methodology, whether or not that's what is the way that it'll be is fine with me. Like I said, it's no skin off my back. It's just simply that's generally things have been have been made more clear because they were put in a format that was actually much more clear to read and look at, and provided an excellent answer. So, I don't think anybody looks like an idiot. It's just that that's never actually happened that way before. And the board goes through a process where they just send a bunch of questions in. Some of them don't know that they've asked the same thing, all of that. So, it just isn't efficient to go through a document that has many different things asked the same way and many things answered the same way. It's been more efficient and more direct to have it be, the summary. But I really don't, whatever is fine with me. It just isn't as maybe efficient to go through for the person reading it. And again, the purpose of the meeting is really, through that public act, non-educational expenses, and some of those things went deeply into educational expenses, that type of thing. So it's whatever people desire, frankly.
Okay, so Griffin.
Thank you, Tammy. So I just happened to, I had printed off the first 37 budget questions that the board submitted. And I like my paper.
Save a tree, Griffin.
I know. So I'm just kind of looking at it now, and I do agree that a lot of the questions I think that came up tonight are on this. So I do understand what you're saying, Dr. Willett, that there's some duplicates. I know Jacob and I both asked a question about line 730, which was one that came up tonight. So I would kind of propose this to Ashley, and if Ashley wants to chime in, that at our meeting on Wednesday, can we add something to have this document? I don't know, I'll admit, I'm sorry, I don't know much past question 37. I think I looked at them online, I didn't print anymore. But if Ashley, that's something that maybe we can address in our meeting on Wednesday, to have the council have access to this. if everybody's comfortable with it. Personally, kind of like what we were saying, when I submitted this question, I certainly have every indication that it might end up being a public document somewhere. So I don't have any issue myself with this being put out to the council. So just a thought that might kind of answer a lot of these questions and give everybody some more detail. So so Ashley, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I can't unmute myself. I'm having.
You can't raise your hand. You can't unmute yourself.
It updated and I haven't really used it, and so I'm like lost. But anyways, what I would like to say, I mean, we definitely, I mean, the Board of Ed have looked at all these line items. We have discussed it all, and I do feel as though that perhaps maybe going forward, it would be a wise idea to just give the town council some idea. Just, you know, even like those little cliff notes, I'm probably dating myself, even though, you know, why not? But having that information, because, you know, this meeting really is supposed to be about non-educational by the statute, the general state statutes. So, I mean, these are definitely questions that are in the weeds, but, you know, the Board of Ed has done our due diligence in order to get these answers. And I have no, you know, we really should try to get that to the town council so that they can read through, because it's almost like I feel like we're at a meeting and all these other meetings have transpired. It's just like what we do in our subcommittees. We have our subcommittees that do a lot of work, bring it to the full board, and then you kind of get your, you know, from that perspective. But at this point, it's just like we're kind of, the Board of Ed members have already done all of this work. And so yes, it should be available to town council so they can see that. And maybe perhaps the questions could be a little bit more directed and not going through the hours long meetings that we've already had about these same questions already, because, you know, we've had hours about these line items. We have talked about it. And like you said, Griffin, page 37, there's a lot more still. I didn't print them all out, but I just know when I go through and I'm like, oh, okay. So here's, you know, I know Wednesday's a meeting. I don't know that necessarily this would be a part of the agenda. But I do think that if we could somehow even condense what we have to just give the town council a little bit more, because I do definitely think there's more of the repetitive and going through all that, but I understand where Walt's saying that when people submit their questions, yes, everything is foilable, everything that you say, anybody can pull it up, but it would be nice to not, you know, scroll through, like have a, let's talk about line item 730. What is that? Okay, here's your answer. And I feel as though maybe that would be more beneficial to everybody involved.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's just stuff that it really, in its form, it's designed to be part of a process that ends in the Board of Ed's adopted budget document. That's why it's done that way. It really isn't in a very clear format because it's got sometimes the questions themselves, you know, pull in a bunch of different things all together that actually, you know, in an articulation, sometimes they're not really asking what they're, you know, it might not be what they're asking from different budget areas. So the answer is put in here, but then it's followed up with conversations we've had in FFC or we've had in board meetings. That's why it's, you know, the document is not, it's not designed as a final document. It's designed as a progress kind of thing along the way that ends up as the Board of Ed adopted budget. So, you know, if there are things that people want to know, that Q&A, you know, that Q&A document that would be published to the website and can be, you know, that is going to be the focus of the next few days and even week. That'll probably answer a lot of what people are looking for, and it'll be more precise. And so, for instance, some of the town council meeting questions that have come tonight, they're not actually in some ways, you know, exactly the same. And so there's probably some things that people could send in a Q&A that we can put in a Q&A matrix like we've done in the past that will be much more concise and direct answers to the specific question at hand versus just throwing that process document out there, which it's fine. It's just not concise. It's not in any way concise, you know. So
part too, though, Dr. Willett, I mean, we do have our minutes for like our board meetings. We do have, you know, videos of our meetings. I mean, we've definitely gone through hours, days of budget process. So It's kind of hard to say, like, to you, well, here, we need to get all this information, but yet it is kind of already out there. It's just, and I know what Christina was saying, where it's hard to try to find all the information, but I mean, we do have minutes, we do have videos, we do have, the information is out there. So maybe perhaps by having one documentation of where to find those answers would be helpful to have a better understanding.
Yeah, and so what makes sense here is, in the next few days, I'll transfer everything that I can over to the budget page that's part of the Board of Ed website. And I think people will be happy with that when they see it. It'll address each of these questions and anything that comes in the public, and it'll do so concisely, and it'll do so in a way that is easy to follow versus sort of, all over. So I think that would be very beneficial, and I think people will be happy with it. Say 1 week from now, seeing what's up there, I think they'll be happy with it. And it'll include questions that, say, Mr. Luba comes up with, who may submit it to the site. I can cover those too. And again, it'll be concise, and it'll be part of a matrix directly answering the specific question that the person is actually looking for. I think that would be a really good way to do it. And if people are unhappy in a week from now, then whatever else they want, fine. But I would give it at least a week so we can get stuff up there. And it is a very unusual year. I mean, I just want to say, I think that it would be fair to say that in the past, we've provided a tremendous amount of information on the website. I plan on doing the exact same thing this year, but I've never had a more challenging year in my life. We're expected to contact trace, we're expected to do all kinds of things that we're doing, and we're keeping everybody safe and keeping the schools open and getting the vaccines going. So if we can just have a week to get that site, with the Q&As up there, that would be appreciated before, all kinds of other things are thrown into the mix.
No, I think that's more than reasonable. Thank you, Dr. Willett.
Sophia.
I just wanted to say that all of this information that the board has worked with, that Dr. Willett provided us with, and that we've gone back and forth with, has not occurred in a vacuum. All of this is available on YouTube. Our minutes are there. And great minds think alike. You guys have asked almost every question that's been asked by the town council was asked by board members and dissected to the nth degree. This is almost like Groundhog Day for me. Like, we did this already. And also I'd like to point out to the town council that, General Statutes section 10.4b points out the ramifications that a school district can face if state needs and state recommendations are not fully funded. So when we talk about special education services and things that the state requires our school system to have, those are things we don't want to tinker with. And I want the town council to be really cognizant of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Brenda?
My screen keeps jumping. Sorry about that. I believe we have some very good subject matter experts on the Board of Ed, elected officials, and I would suggest that maybe the town council Republicans reach out to the Board of Ed Republicans and ask them questions.
We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to meet with them.
You guys can caucus individually.
We can't caucus
No,
across
we
the
cannot.
Okay, I haven't done it. I have been paying attention, but there's, maybe you can ask your Republican cohorts then, hey, where can I find this information? Which meeting did you discuss this? Or where in the minutes was this discussed? That information, I'm sure they'd be able to help you find at least. Like I said, the information's out there. We're in the middle of a pandemic, that we're taking a look at creating a new school or building a new school at the moment. In the next week, I'm sure Dr. Willett's going to be inundated with how to get all of his educators and staff vaccinated, because I believe that starts March 1st. So, whatever we can do to try to alleviate some of what's on his plate would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Lou?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along the lines of what Sophia was saying, and thank you for bringing us back to that point. I think that we're all looking at what's making sure that there's the free and appropriate public education. That's all. That's what we're concerned about. We understand the statutory requirements, but it's something that we need to make sure that it's not something that we're looking to. We're just looking to make sure that we understand the budget and that there's not anything in there that that could be deemed as not fully appropriate or as something that would be additional expenses. And I think that the main reason why I think that the document, that the quicker we get it out there, is because on, let's see, March 3rd is when Mr. Rosen presents his final budget to us. That means that we have less than a week to be able to understand everything that's going on here on all the budgets across the board, on the town budget, on all the departments involved in the town, and on the as well as the Board of Education. So while I understand what Brenda is saying, I think it's something that if it's a document that answers the questions that we've already asked, and I know that you guys have been very thorough, you guys and ladies have all been thorough in your questions and making sure that all the bases are covered, we need to also be able to understand it as well, so that we're not asking multiple questions on things. Where again we're now on almost 3 hours of a meeting, where if it's already been covered, had we gotten this information beforehand, we could have been very precise in our questions.
All right,
that's what my request is that I like to get this document. I don't care, at least me personally, I've read through tons of discovery. Reading through more documents like this isn't going to faze me. And it's something that I'd rather get all this information in its raw form quicker, so I can be able to draw some, if there's questions that I have, very pointed questions on it, as opposed to laying out a list of things and saying, well, this was what was discussed. So that's
all right. So I think
if I can just make a comment about that, though. I mean, I think the problem here is I get it, and I don't, it's a trust thing too. It's kind of like if there was a confidence that what we would set up would be more clear and more useful than the thing that exists, then that confidence, that trust would be okay. Well, let them say, let that be the case, because under the process we're in, the town council makes suggestions and the board responds in writing. That's again what the meeting's about. Your point about it being less than a week, that's why you have elected members to a board of education, because the town council is not supposed to do the job of the board. The board asks those questions, the board provides an adopted budget, it provides it to the town. There isn't a big timeline for the council to understand everything that the board understood or went through in 2 months, or even in a year or 2 years of being a board member. That's why a Board of Ed exists, so that due diligence is done by the elected members of the board. That doesn't mean the town council can't get answers to this or that. It's just, it's just, I guess it comes down to, at the end of the day, to a lot of gray here. And what I'm saying is that I think it would be actually a more valuable thing for the council for you to have a document that had concise and direct answers to questions. But at the end, you can have whatever you want, but some of these things aren't actually going to provide clarity because of the way they're even asked. We had to figure out what was being asked, and that wasn't necessarily all done on paper. That was done in some conversation as well. So the document isn't as valuable as just having the direct question and the direct answer versus a question that asks a whole series of things that isn't maybe getting to the meat of what the actual desire for information was. So it's just about trust. I mean, if you trust the board has done its due diligence, that's what the timeline is all about, then trust that it's giving you a document, or that through this process will publish a document that will get to what you're looking for. And that's been the history. We've done that. That's been what we've done. I think there's a good track record of that.
Okay, so in essence of
trust, I think it's beyond a matter of trust. It's a matter of where we can't ask questions that we don't know what else has been asked by the Board of Education members. I trust them completely, but I need to see what questions have been asked so I can understand, and so I'm not missing anything. Just like I would go with Chief Lytle and ask him questions about his budget for the firehouses or anyone else.
Exactly, you would go to Chief Lytle.
That's been answered. You've seen these meetings. We've been the same way with them as well. And so it's not like we're treating the Board of Education any differently or we don't trust them. We have to ask these questions. And that's why I'm asking for these documents. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I know that I didn't mean
That's
to.
all right. I'm just, in the essence of moving on, we would like to see whatever questions have been asked so we can review them. So we're not asking repetitive questions. However that gets done, you know, the next stage in this is after Mike presents us a budget, we are going to have meetings with all of the areas again. So in essence of that, if we can get the questions and answers, then that will limit our questions when we have that meeting. So I think we have officially asked the question, answered the question about 10 times. So I think we're good to kind of move on from that. Madhu, I see your hand is up. Do you want to have the last
Yeah,
on this?
yeah. I just wanted to comment and just say we spent dozens of hours on this, and I just need to also stress that this was passed unanimously. You know, just want you all to remember that when you're thinking about this.
Thank you. All right. I have a couple other questions. I don't know if anybody else does. They're pretty simple. Well, I think they are anyway. Dr. Willett, you guys, you just reviewed for Councilman Regan, the PD, and there was a bunch of programs and such in there. I know some of them were used funds last year pre-purchased. So my question is, the last Board of Ed meeting that we were at, I think you were projecting to possibly have $1 million left at the end of the year. I know that that's tentative and can change at any point in time, but do we have any kind of update or estimate on where you are for actuals this year? And if there is any pre-purchasing opportunities that can occur this year like we did last year?
You know, this is something that, you know, the board is going to continually be discussing like they did as we led into last year. And the goal is, to the greatest extent possible, knowing the challenges we face, to do everything we can to, you know, try to consolidate and have, you know, if there is a chance of having available resources at the end of the year, we would like to try to do that. Because we know that there's a benefit to it. Having said that, you know, that question has been posed before, and I think the hard part about it is, you know, for instance, the other day, you know, this discussion of going to 5 days a week, for instance. Well, we would probably have to make, you know, we have to look at it and say, okay, well, if we're going to stay within the guidelines we're expected to stay in, we need to increase the amount of resources we're using currently in terms of human beings to do the cleaning that we would have been able to do had we, you know, stayed with, say, 4 day. Going to 5 day means an increase in human resources, whether it be hours or people. In one scenario, it was 9 additional people for some additional hours here and there. You know, in order to make certain changes, that's going to have an impact on the bottom line too. So my objective is always to find any way I can consolidate and end the year, you know, with some efficiency. But there are going to be things that pop up this year that are obstacles to that. So I hope that we are in a place like that. I think there's some reason to feel that we will be, but at the same time, there are things that can pop out of nowhere that we have to cover, and that is going to eat into that. So it's a tentative, you know, yes, but it's a cautious yes as we look forward. And I will be under the direction of the board chair and the board, you know, creating something similar to the phase documents that we had last year. So we, you know, everybody and the board in particular can get an understanding of how we're coming into the end. So that would be, we would follow a similar process to the process that we followed last year.
So you're thinking there will be money left at the end of the year?
Well, I know that
I'm just
that's what you're
looking for a
hoping.
simple, you know, like last time I was at your meeting, it was $1 million.
There's nothing more than I want to say, oh yes, I think this will go this way perfectly. But I think the problem is, you know, a week ago, I didn't think we'd have to hire 9 more people or 4 or 5 to cover, you know, for a couple of extra hours here and there to cover something in order to be able to, you know, go 5 days, for instance. I mean, I really didn't know that a week ago. So the answer is the goal is through following the same process that we followed last year to make very clear what resources may be available as we come closer and closer to the end of the year. Much like the phase documents did before, if the Board of Ed directs such and wants such, which I would imagine somewhere along the line they will, that is the process we would follow this year too. So there's an articulation as we come closer and closer to the end of the fiscal year, what resources are available. So I'm saying possibly that could be the case.
Okay, because I think that would help with the majority of the questions. I think that, like I said, Councilman Regan asked, a lot of that stuff looks like it's the kind of thing that could be purchased, like the Promethean boards or, textbooks or.
The only problem with that, again, and this is why, talking one-on-one allows for a lot more follow-up, is that, the reason why we don't want to use, say, certain funds to offset certain future things is because you have to crawl out of them the next year. So anything that, those kinds of things, some of them are on a replacement cycle. They're meant to replace. So some of the stuff that is one time has already been taken out. That's part of the budget document too. That some of those expenses that were one-time things have been taken out. Some of those other ones are meant to replace.
Right. So if it's something that's going to be cyclical, then I understand not keeping that in. But I recall from last year, like the Literacy How was a 2-year program. So you were paying for 1 year and then you had 1 year left. So if it's a 2-year program and
it depends. It's 2 years unless you see that there's your populations are showing a greater need for phonics. I mean, that's the thing is that, this is why an entire year of understanding, goes into that as we talk about it more and we talk about it in, curriculum committee and we talk about it in FFC. And that's why when when something gets handed over to the town council, a lot of this work has been done. That's where we are. 319 has in it what's needed for the strategic, considerations. If there is something available at the end, I think that there has been in that phase process is a very efficient way of, trying to get to what we could leverage. But it's very difficult in, say, February to know that for sure, especially given the fluctuations. So I don't think we can count on some of that, but it's good if it comes along, it would definitely help. And the kind of place it would help is maybe there's more money to transfer back into that coronavirus relief fund, because that was established and we revisit that at the end of this fiscal year, I think June through August. That would be a good place for maybe things to go, because then, as those unanticipated expenses come up, we can cover them. And as we know, there's about 280,000 of those as we speak. And 283,000 was what that coronavirus relief fund had in it. So things will come and offset it, and then other things will take it. But at the end of the year, that may be the place that it goes. But I don't think we would ever want to continue saying, well, we can take this chunk out or assume that we won't need Literacy How. We can only talk about it based on the info we have. And then I can get info 4 weeks from then that say, we're noticing greater phonics needs. And that kind of thing does happen a lot, where, we start to see something shift. And we're seeing that. And that's another reason why we're asking for speech language pathologists. I wouldn't have known to ask for that not so long ago. And that is a big shift. Last year, if you had asked me if, what we would need, I probably wouldn't have said a speech language pathologist. So it all shifts based on the trends and the data we're seeing and how we have to address it. And those are all part of those subcommittee meetings and those meetings that the board ultimately hands that budget over. It's why they've done weeks and weeks and weeks of work with it.
Okay, anybody else have any other final questions? No. All right, then, Mike, I don't know if we need
I think last year
we don't need a motion, right?
Last year, I believe we did have a motion to adjourn, but just of council.
Steve.
All right, Steve Jones, I'd make a motion to adjourn at 10:06.
Brenda Falusi, I'll second that.
All right, any discussion? Town council, all in favor? Brenda?
Aye.
Cassandra?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Lou?
Aye.
Kurt?
Aye.
I'm an aye. That's unanimous. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Mario, I love that background.